Chapter 2736 Advancing to the Pseudo-Heavenly Venerable Tier. Chapter 2736 Advancing to the Pseudo-Heavenly Venerable Tier. 2736 Advancing to the Pseudo-Heavenly Venerable Tier. The response from the Wu clan came very quickly, but it did not mention Wu Haoyang. Instead, it was a sliver of divine sense of their grand elder, Wu Jihong, that was transmitted over. Hehe, the little kid truly likes to fool around. It contained just these few short words. This was a 7th tier heavenly venerate having stuck a label on this matter. It was just fooling around. Since it was fooling around, what need was there to pursue it any further? Who would dare take the risk of offending a 7th tier heavenly venerate to forcefully apprehend Wu Haoyang? Rules were meant to be broken, and a 7th tier heavenly venerate would be qualified to break rules. As long as the other 7th tier heavenly venerates did not speak up, he was the heaven and earth, he was he who made the rules, and he was justice. This matter could only be left unresolved. When Linghan found this out, he was first surprised. No wonder Wu Haoyang dared to be so arrogant. Firstly, he indeed had the ability, and secondly, he had his clan backing him up. Having caused such great trouble, he actually could still go unpunished. This was really eye-opening for Linghan. Linghan only had this thought, and then did not further think on this matter. In any case, it was he that had the upper hand in the battle with Wu Haoyang. Even if anyone were to hate, it would be Wu Haoyang hating him. It was more important to improve his strength. Linghan immediately went into seclusion. He was going to refine the 7 deaths 7 explosions pill. Otherwise, if Wu Haoyang succeeded in breaking through, and he had not, then based on Wu Haoyang's personality, he would definitely defeat Linghan in public and trample all over him. Linghan ingested the 7 deaths 7 explosions pill and began to refine the medicinal effects. There was not much reaction after just ingesting the alchemical pill, but when the medicinal effects spread out and began to circulate through his body, Linghan felt things get worse. The medicinal effects were extremely frightening. It was like there was a sharp dagger that was gouging at his body and soul, wanting to forcefully tear him into shreds. 7 deaths 7 explosions pill meant that he would have to go through 7 deadly calamities, 7 instances of his mind exploding violently. If he survived, only then would he gain a great improvement. Pa. Pieces of flesh fell from Linghan's body. He had a physique of divine metal, but now it was completely useless. His flesh fell bit by bit, and he soon became a blooded figure and skeleton. However, his skeleton was even sturdier, and was not destroyed by the medicinal effects. Glowing luster wrapped around him, and his heart was still encased in his ribs, beating strongly. Linghan channeled the indestructible heaven scroll, and golden seals appeared, transforming into his flesh and blood again. A whole 3 days later, he had finally made it through. His cultivation level instantly began to soar wildly. A feeling of invincibility rose up in him. He wanted nothing more than to defeat all the elites of this world and stand alone, above all of them. He wanted to fight. Linghan's heart jolted. He had survived a deadly calamity, but had become violent. This was another trial. He hurriedly steadied his mind, and suppressed these violent urges with his strong determination and willpower. Another 3 days passed, and he survived it. However, the medicinal effects became violent again. His flesh and blood once again began to fall, and it felt as if his mind was about to be torn apart, causing him such agony that he wanted to scream loudly. This time, it was even harder to bear. Thankfully, Linghan had previously experienced countless hardships. Though this was very hard to bear, it was still not enough to break past his limits. 3 days later, the medicinal effects became gentle, and Linghan greeted another wave of mad increase of his cultivation level, but he became violent again quickly afterwards. After experiencing this kind of endless cycle 5 times, even with Linghan's willpower, he was close to his limits. The 6th wave of violent medicinal effects arrived again. Crack. This time, cracks appeared even in his bones, which was extremely terrifying. He survived it with great difficulty. His cultivation level spiked, soaring all the way to peak stage 9th heaven. It had been mentioned that he was essentially a pseudo-heavenly venerate. It was just that others began from a complete one, while he started from 0,001. Thus, there was no need for him to take any other steps by this time. As a matter of natural course, he became a pseudo-heavenly venerate. Clang! Instantly, a reaction came from the heaven and earth. A heavenly tribulation was about to arrive. Ling Han did not fear the heavenly tribulation. By now, he had the physique of divine metal, so it was fine even if he were to sit, or even lie down, through the whole process of the heavenly tribulation, but the problem now was that the present occasion was slightly unsuitable. Under the medicinal effects, Ling Han became violent again, and when the heavenly tribulation descended and blasted him, it also caused his temperament, which he had calmed down with much difficulty, to become restless and irritable. A feeling of sadism rose up in him. He wanted to massacre the whole world. Withdraw. He aggressively blasted back at the heavenly tribulation, his black locks flying upwards and his eyes bright red, making him look like a demon. You want to control me? Impossible. Ling Han cried out. Veins popped on his forehead, but his gaze was regaining clarity. He had battled countless times throughout his life, and his willpower was as strong as iron and steel, so how could he fall here? 3 days later, Ling Han finally made it through. But the final wave of death and explosion assaulted again. Ling Han's bones were instantly shattered. He channeled the indestructible heaven's scroll, forcefully putting his bones together, but when the medicinal effects unfurled, his bones shattered once more. He continuously repeated this process. He was really close to dying. Then, his mind became violent again. Another 3 days later, calm returned to Ling Han's expression. His eyes opened, his gaze clear. He had finally made it through. Ling Han sighed in relief. He wondered, if he were to be given another 7 deaths 7 explosions pill now, would he still take it? He could not be certain. Based on his yearning for strength, he would choose to ingest it, but when he thought back to the agony endured for more than a month previously, he felt a wariness of never wanting to encounter this kind of alchemical pill again. What is the point of feeling conflicted over such a nonsensical matter? There is no second 7 deaths 7 explosions pill. Ling Han shook his head. He cast his eyes inwards, and could see that after the celestial seed had gone through 9 transformations, it had become a tiny figure that looked very much like him. This figure sat cross-legged in his mind with the air of primal chaos circulating around it, looking austere and dignified. He once again tried to communicate with void particles, while the celestial seed figure communicated with the heaven and earth. There was no need for him to be boosted with heavenly venerable seals. He could touch void particles just by stretching out his hand, and they entered into his body and circulated, improving his body art. Realization dawned on Ling Han. No wonder one had to reach peak stage 9th heaven to be able to qualify to attempt to break through to the pseudo-heavenly venerable tier. That was because after the celestial seed went through 9 transformations, it would be considerably easier to communicate with the fundamental power of the Genesis world. Of course, Ling Han had long since been able to communicate with void particle, and had completed this process ahead of time. Thus, he only had to stretch out his hand. If this had been another peak stage 9th heaven celestial king, he might never be able to sense that unique power of the realm for his whole lifetime, what more the fundamental powers of the Genesis world. Similarly, Ling Han clearly could sense void particles, but could not sense the unique power of the flaming frost realm. He also could not sense the other 5 fundamental powers. Every type of power would have a repelling nature, obstructing the sensing of other powers. Thus, the higher the cultivation level, the harder it is to advance further. Ling Han began to understand. Heavenly venerable seals once again appeared in his mind, and the speed of his extraction of void particles instantly increased slightly. Now, he was finally a real pseudo-heavenly venerate. He no longer had to be so cautious in his extraction of void particles. Now that his cultivation level had reached the appropriate level, everything would come easily. Too bad. My battle prowess has not welcomed a revolutionary change. Ling Han shook his head. Breaking through to the pseudo-heavenly venerable tier had only unlocked the upper limits for his further improvement of body art, and just like other 9th heaven celestial kings that had broken through to the pseudo-heavenly venerable tier, he could only begin cultivating body art, but to really exhibit this advance in the increase of battle prowess, that would come much, much later. Primarily, his advancement came from the 7 Deaths 7 Explosions pill. As for himself, that would need accumulated power over time. However, this should be enough to fight a Heavenly Venerate. Ling Han smiled because he could already use Heavenly Venerate techniques without limits at present, and there were no longer any time restrictions. Ling Han, get out here and fight me. Outside, Wu Haoyang's voice rang out once more. Chapter 2737, 2737 A Great Battle Without Comparison. Chapter 2737, 2737 A Great Battle Without Comparison. 2737 A Great Battle Without Comparison. Wu Haoyang was truly like a lingering ghost. Peng, peng, peng. The sounds of battle could be heard all the way over here. Ling Han frowned, and immediately rushed out. The Rain Emperor, the Empress, the Karmic Life Heavenly Venerable, and the large black dog were all trying to stop Wu Haoyang, but faced with his physique, none of them could achieve this. Hence, Wu Haoyang forged his way all the way here, and no one could stop him. Ling Han. When he spotted Ling Han, Wu Haoyang's eyes immediately lit up, his fighting spirit soaring. Humph. Ling Han ignored him completely, directly rushing forwards and attacking. Touching his family and friends was his peeve. No one could touch them. Wu Haoyang naturally was unafraid, and similarly brandished his fists and clashed with Ling Han. By now, there were no longer any 9 ribbons of iridescent light wrapped around him, which meant that he, like Ling Han, had also advanced to the pseudo-heavenly venerable tier. Boom, boom, boom. The 2 great prodigies immediately took their battle to the skies, and then unleashed their respective battle prowess. They were both clashing with Heavenly Venerate techniques. After advancing to the pseudo-heavenly venerable tier, they both possessed an ability that true Heavenly Venerates possessed, the unrestricted use of a Heavenly Venerate technique. Thus, though the increase to their standard battle prowess was not great, if the Heavenly Venerate techniques were accounted for as well, they would be too terrifying. The commotion caused by this battle was very loud, drawing many people out to check what was going on. When they discovered that Ling Han and Wu Haoyang were battling intensely, everyone's expression changed. However, both of them had advanced, setting foot in the pseudo-heavenly venerable tier at the same time, and the increase in their strength was more or less equal. Thus, like during the previous battle in the Heavenly Venerate tool, they were still in a situation wherein neither could defeat or subdue the other. This time, however, Ling Han was unwilling to stop. He did not fear being challenged, but Wu Haoyang had actually fought his way to his home, and almost wounded the Empress and the others. This was something he could not accept. He was going to crush this bastard. The battle continued, and even the 2 Heavenly Venerates that were standing by here had no plans on interfering to stop them, because it was useless even if they did. They could not stop the duo at all. The present Ling Han and Wu Haoyang were no longer inferior to true Heavenly Venerates. Furthermore, Wu Haoyang was so strange. If he turned around to wound them instead, just how embarrassing would that be? 1 day, 2 days, 10 days, a month, and the 2 great prodigies continued their battle incessantly. The battle was constantly and incredibly intense. Neither of them made any mention of stopping. They both had a reason and determination to defeat the other completely. The people beneath them were all astounded. They were 2 pseudo-heavenly venerates, but had maintained Heavenly Venerable tier battle prowess for a month straight. Just how terrifying was this? Tu Shu, Tai Binghe, and the other super rookies could only shake their heads. It seemed like they could only contend for glory with these 2 after they had become second-tier Heavenly Venerates. They had no choice but to submit. When they had fought until the 2nd month, a sharp scream suddenly interrupted their peace. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Hysteria's troops launched an assault again. Everyone hurriedly made their preparations. Those that should be on the city wall went upwards, and those that should not stayed on the defense below, preparing to deal with those that escaped through the net. But Ling Han was still fighting with Wu Haoyang. By now, no one else existed in their eyes. All they could see was each other. Boom. Hysteria's troops had already arrived. The city wall immediately glowed, blasting out an attack. By itself, this was a great weapon. Group after group of ground troops collapsed, and even the pseudo-heavenly venerates could not withstand a single blast. However, there would be those that managed to escape through their net and charged over to this side of the wall. Some fell into the city, while some charged into the skies, launching an offensive at Ling Han and Wu Haoyang. After being attacked, Ling Han awoke from the state of violent fighting spirit he had sunk into. His eyes swept over his surroundings, and saw the troops that were tightly packed beneath him. They covered mountains and plains, and went as far as the eye could see. He had changed his mind. Wu Haoyang, we will fight later, Xiu. He descended, and rushed into Hysteria's troops. Throwing out both fists, he began a massacre. Stop! Wu Haoyang immediately set off in pursuit. The two of them had fallen into Hysteria's troops outside the city at the same time. It was like they were lambs that had mistakenly wandered into a pack of wolves. Immediately, they were surrounded and attacked. Scram! Wu Haoyang had fallen behind by a step, yet he was at least several dozen kilometers away from Ling Han, and just how many troops of Hysteria lay across this distance? He roared furiously, and charged towards Ling Han. Peng, peng, peng. Using both fists, he destroyed all the troops of Hysteria that blocked his way one after another. Ling Han's speed was not low, either. His left hand used the 5 elements lightning technique, while his right hand held the divine demon sword, which was boosted with the 9 transformations divine scroll. He was attacking even more fiercely. These weren't lambs that had fallen into a pack of wolves, but rather 2 ferocious lions that had pounced into a flock of sheep. It would only be they that would be causing a massacre. They were really too strong. Pseudo-heavenly venerates actually weren't even worthy of taking a strike head-on from them. This was natural. In the first place, their battle prowess was capable of sweeping aside 99% of pseudo-heavenly venerates, and now, further boosted with heavenly venerate techniques, they would definitely be even more awesome. Wang. Waves of light from the city wall surged over. Instantly, group after group of Hysteria's troops fell like they were wheat being harvested. Furthermore, this light wave did not differentiate between enemy and friend. Both Ling Han and Wu Haoyang were within attack range. Wu Haoyang turned into light, and as the wave of light surged past, it did not have any effect on him. Ling Han was not much inferior. He channeled the indestructible heaven scroll, and multiple golden seals formed on his body, allowing him to withstand this attack. The wave of light that was capable of insta-killing pseudo-heavenly venerates did not cause the slightest bit of damage to the two of them. Ling Han let out a battle cry, and continued his massacre. The divine demon sword delivered sword chi that was several thousands of meters long. This destructive power was not much weaker than the city light. With a single sweep of his sword, at least a dozen monsters were sliced in half. It was only over a dozen because these monsters were too massive. If they were only the size of a normal human being, a single strike would kill several hundred to several thousand of them. Even so, Ling Han had also turned into a god of death. Competing in the number of kills, Wu Haoyang looked defiant. I will not lose to you in anything. He was still chasing after Ling Han, but his focus was now placed on his enemy kills, wanting to compete with Ling Han in this manner. Both of them were so crazy, yet it caused the people who were on the city wall to be dumbfounded. Even the 2 great heavenly venerates couldn't help but twitch. If it had been them in the duo's place, their battle prowess would not be inferior to that of Ling Han or Wu Haoyang, but their defense would definitely be outmatched. Very soon, they would be attacked so hard that they would have no choice but to flee back behind the city wall. Yet Ling Han and Wu Haoyang both possessed above-average defense, which was completely capable of withstanding the siege of pseudo-heavenly venerates, accomplishing battle merits that even heavenly venerates could only stare at. 7 days later, the army retreated. Ling Han, come and fight me. Wu Haoyang was again howling, charging towards Ling Han. Ling Han naturally would not retreat. Turning around, he began to battle Wu Haoyang once more. Crazy, they had both really gone crazy. The people in the city were all numb with shock. They had endured such a great battle, and all of them felt weary, both mentally and physically, desperately wanting a good rest. But Ling Han and Wu Haoyang had previously been fighting right in the depths of the enemy troops, so they would definitely be even more tired, yet now they were actually fighting with each other again. How could everyone accept that? These two freaks. However, what was even more shocking was the fact that when the recent leaderboard was once again updated 11 days later, Wu Haoyang had directly charged his way up the recent leaderboard. In a single battle, he had climbed into the recent leaderboard. It should be known that this was adding up all the battle merits over a time span of 1 million years. Wu Haoyang was ranked at the 362nd place, having killed 986 pseudo-heavenly venerates and 38,427 ninth heaven celestial king. What was even more terrifying was Ling Han. He naturally was still number 1, but the number of pseudo-heavenly venerates he had killed soared past 13,000, and as many as over 50,000 ninth heaven celestial kings had perished in his hand. Chapter 2738, 2738 Chances of Close to Zero. Chapter 2738, 2738 Chances of Close to Zero. 2738 Chances of Close to Zero. Setting aside how Ling Han had directly climbed onto the recent leaderboard on his first attempt, either of their battle merits could be considered a miracle. To have killed 1,000 to 2,000 pseudo-heavenly venerates in a single battle, who could believe that? But it couldn't be helped. The two of them were incredibly extraordinary, and had mastered directly the fundamental power of the Genesis world. 4 pseudo-heavenly venerates, this was a crushing advantage, and added with super strong defense for one, while the other could not be wounded by any force, they were both immortal monsters, and that was what had led to them having accomplished such a magnificent feat. Perhaps there would be no one that could surpass the battle merits that they had accumulated even after another several hundred epochs. In the past, why hadn't Lin Yolian and Xin Chihu been so powerful? That was very simple. At the time, they had not charged out to kill enemies when the enemy troops were attacking the city, so how could their enemy kill rate be compared to that of Ling Han and Wu Haoyang? Ling Han and Wu Haoyang were still fighting. The two of them were now truly angered by their battle, and they were determined to see who was the stronger between the two of them, and who the victor of their battle would be. At the very end, everyone had gotten accustomed to it. A great many people were already impatient from watching, and couldn't be bothered to pay any more attention. After all, it was their own cultivation that was the most important. What was the use of watching the excitement? However, there were still a lot of spectators. Watching the clash between two great prodigies would definitely give one a certain level of appreciation. This battle really had no end. They both were the type that was determined to win and be the best. Moreover, the stronger their opponent was, the more they wanted to defeat him. 10 years, 100 years. Time passed so swiftly. In this period, Hysteria even launched a few more assaults, yet this still couldn't stop them. However, when the enemy troops attacked, the two of them would first charge to attack Hysteria's troops by tacit agreement. 1,000 years passed, and the recent leaderboard was updated again. Not only was Ling Han's position as the first place unmovable, even his ranking on the recent leaderboard had leaped a great distance forwards. Wu Haoyang's rank had directly come to 7th, and it was certain that he would already be 2nd after the next update. After battling another 300 years, they finally stopped, but they did not go their separate ways. Instead, they sat down on the sidelines, digesting the experience that they had accumulated throughout the battle. Now that the battle had come so far, they both knew that there was no way they could defeat their opponent with their present strength. Hence, they could only create even stronger ultimate moves, and only then would they be able to win the upper hand, or even overwhelm their opponent completely. Over a dozen years later, Ling Han's eyes suddenly snapped open. He leaped up, and Wu Haoyang did the same on the other side as well. The two of them were really too genius, and they were incredibly close as well. The battle resumed. Boom, boom, boom. They clashed intensely. This time, their respective battle prowess had increased slightly, and they were fighting even more manically, but it was still hard to distinguish who was stronger between the two of them. They fought for another 200-odd years, and then stopped again. They sat down and mulled over their gains achieved in this battle. Over a dozen years later, they battled again. With such continuous pausing and battling then pausing, a new millennium soon came. After the recent leaderboard was updated again, Wu Haoyang was ranked second, as expected. However, the gap between his and Ling Han's battle merits had become even wider. It could not be helped. Ling Han had a heavenly venerate tool, so his destructive power was a considerable number of times greater than Wu Haoyang's. No one would have expected that this was actually only the beginning of Ling Han and Wu Haoyang's madness. Millennia passed one after another, and their positions on the recent leaderboard could be shaken by no one. Wu Haoyang had also very quickly climbed onto the general leaderboard and began to advance fiercely ahead. In the blink of an eye, 70,000 years had passed. Ling Han had already reached the 34th place on the general leaderboard, and Wu Haoyang had reached the 99th. The battle merits that the two of them had accomplished together were even more astounding than those of Xin Qihu and Lin Youlian. It was possible that their results could never be surpassed. At this time, they finally stopped their battle. They both knew that it was impossible to subdue the other while at the pseudo-heavenly venerable tier. Hence, they each wanted to break through to the heavenly venerable tier faster than the other, or become a second-tier heavenly venerate or third-tier heavenly venerate. Though they were reluctant, they each had no choice but to recognize the other as a strong rival, and having this kind of opponent would motivate them to improve even faster. After returning to his abode, Ling Han immediately went into a long period of seclusion. He wanted to completely digest the appreciation that had been brought through this extensive battle. At the same time, he wanted to find a way to defeat Wu Haoyang. If he took the normal path, step after step, there was no way that he could surpass Wu Haoyang, because Wu Haoyang was completely not inferior to him in natural talent and genius at all. In fact, the latter even had a grandfather that was a 7th-tier heavenly venerate, and this was something that Ling Han could not match. Hence, if Ling Han wanted to defeat Wu Haoyang, he would need to find some other way. Alternatively, Ling Han could surpass Wu Haoyang in terms of cultivation speed. This was really impossible, however. Wasn't trying to compete with the accumulation of resources and wealth of a 7th-tier heavenly venerate a joke? Otherwise, Ling Han had to think of some way to make himself even stronger within the same cultivation level. What to do now? Actually, Ling Han had long since had this idea. However, firstly, his cultivation level had not reached the appropriate level, and secondly, he had not encountered powerful opponents, so he had only had a vague idea previously. Ling Han set his eye on the countless realms of the Genesis world. He naturally was not planning to devour these realms, but rather wanted to comprehend the unique powers of these realms one after another, then fuse them together, and become the strongest first-tier heavenly venerate. This was easy to say, but it was definitely impossible that he was the only one to come up with this idea throughout such extensive history. Why had there never been anyone who had succeeded before? Was it because it was too difficult? Or was it that they did not know where to begin, or was it just impossible? After Ling Han had digested the benefits brought by this extensive battle, he went to meet the karmic life heavenly venerable, and they discussed the possibility of him achieving such a feat. However, the karmic life heavenly venerable did not know, either. He came from the celestial realm. Previously, he had only known that there had been another realm called the foreign realm. He had not thought about this aspect at all. It seemed like Ling Han would have to ask for guidance from such mighty figures like Zhu Heng, Lin Xiaoyang, or even Lin Luo to be able to get his answers. Still, could he just simply meet with such powerful figures? Ling Han did the next best thing. He took a period of leave, and returned to the world's paramount martial academy. He was going to find Wally. This guy's knowledge base was extremely vast, and he also possessed super strong calculation, analysis, and deduction ability. Perhaps it would give Ling Han an unexpected surprise. Several decades later, Ling Han returned to the world's paramount martial academy. Only several thousand years had passed. To the martial academy, it was just like yesterday. Nothing had changed at all. Ling Han barged through the formation and into the martial academy. Very soon, he found Wally. This guy was earnestly refining divine metal. This was his method of cultivation. A thought suddenly came to Ling Han. Could it be possible that there would come a day that Wally's body would become as tough and hard as a heavenly venerate tool? Wally was the type to keep clear accounts even with his own brother. If Ling Han wanted to make a request of Wally, he naturally had to pay accordingly. For this, Ling Han had given Wally over 100 pieces of divine metal. A considerable number of them were on credit. At present, there was no way Ling Han could produce so many pieces of divine metal, and his credibility was not too bad, or rather it could be said that he was a major client, so Wally allowed him to owe the rest on credit. Wally began his calculations. The light on his body dimmed and brightened continuously, but this calculation actually continued for a whole 110,000 years. As Ling Han waited, he continued cultivating. If it were not for the fact that Wally was glowing and dimming in intervals, he would wonder if the latter had already died. The difficulty level is extremely high, but there is still 3.7% of 100 trillionth chance of success, Wally finally said. 3.7% of 100 trillionth chance of success. Ling Han did not know how Wally had calculated this chance of success, but he knew this was a probability that was boundlessly close to zero. No wonder no one had ever succeeded before in history. Chapter 2739, 2739 Requesting Leave. Chapter 2739, 2739 Requesting Leave. 2739 Requesting Leave. Wally pondered for a moment before saying, however, after considering the fact that you've already interacted with void particle energy, due to the repulsion of this void particle energy, the chance of success will further decrease by fourfold. Ling Han rolled his eyes in an exaggerated manner. Did this not imply a chance of less than 1 in 100 trillion? This was infinitesimally close to zero. Was this a completely impossible task? Ling Han fell deep in thought. His future was indeed bright, and as long as he progressed normally, he would eventually become the most powerful first-tier heavenly venerate. Only after advancing to the second tier would his advantage disappear. 4 people to become a heavenly venerate, which of them wasn't a supreme prodigy? Thus, if one attempted to defeat such a foe, that would be an extremely difficult task. Now, Ling Han possessed 3 heavenly venerate techniques, and he had more so been tempered by void particle energy. Thus, his battle prowess was enough to crush all pseudo-heavenly venerates. In fact, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage even against first-tier heavenly venerates. However, such an advantage would only exist while he remained at the first tier. After advancing to the second tier, he would become just like everyone else. He would have to take things one step at a time. Can I master 6 different fundamental powers of the Genesis world first? And only master the unique power of the dimension after that? Ling Han asked Wally. If this were possible, he could extend his advantage all the way until he became a 6th-tier heavenly venerate. After advancing to the 7th tier, how many more opponents would he have? This number could definitely be counted on one hand, or perhaps 2 hands. Thus, what would it matter if their battle prowess became the same? Wally shook his head, and replied, after becoming a heavenly venerate, it's very difficult to turn back around to comprehend the fundamental power of the world. Even if you comprehend only one more, it will still render it impossible for you to comprehend the unique and fundamental power of this dimension. The 6th tier will be your limit. Then that's meaningless. To be invincible before the 7th tier, yet be unable to reach the 7th tier forever? Won't I be screwed? If it were someone else, would the lure of reaching the 6th tier not be enticing and freakish enough? However, Ling Han's goal had always been the 7th tier. He wanted to become the strongest. In other words, if I want to become invincible, my only choice is to gamble with that 1 in 100 trillion chance. Ling Han said with a frown. It's a chance smaller than 1 in 100 trillion, Wally corrected. Ling Han looked Wally in the eyes. Could he not be so pedantic at such a moment? All right. Ling Han suddenly discovered a burst of confidence. Even though his chances were microscopic, he would still give it a shot. Before this, possessing the unique power of a dimension was always a weakness. After all, just how powerful were he, Wu Haoyang, Lin Yolian, and Xin Chihu? They could easily crush other pseudo-heavenly venerates with a wave of their hands. This was for no other reason than having experienced tempering from void particles or other fundamental powers of Genesis worlds. After advancing to the first tier, they could still maintain or even extend this advantage. However, what if one could possess the power of 2 dimensions? Or even 3? Or 10? Or 100? At that time, would one still lose to those who had been tempered by void particle energy? If the quality was inferior, one could make up for it with quantity. In some sense, this would be akin to advancing to the 8th tier, 9th tier, or 10th tier. After discussing some finer details with Worley, Ling Han left the Martial Academy. He had initially wanted to deal with some old animosities and drag out the Imperial Void Celestial King and his son to give them a healthy beating. However, he couldn't find the two of them, and it appeared as if they had gone to the realm battlefield. However, Ling Han didn't recall seeing them in the first level. Perhaps the Imperial Void Celestial King had already become a heavenly venerate. This wasn't impossible. After all, the Imperial Void Celestial King was no less talented than the karmic life Heavenly Venerable. All he lacked was some rare opportunities, and it was because of this that he had been unable to take that vital step. Even while in the celestial realm, he had already been very close to advancing to the Heavenly Venerable tier. After arriving in this transcendent dimension, it would be extremely normal for him to advance in leaps and bounds. So be it if he advanced. In Ling Han's eyes, first-tier heavenly venerates were only SOSO. He could easily rival them. Meanwhile, if he also became a first-tier heavenly venerate, his advantage provided by the void particle energy would allow him to crush other first-tier heavenly venerates as if they were his playthings. After several more decades spent on travel, Ling Han finally returned to the realm battlefield. Ling Han discussed his plans with the Empress. After all, no one had ever succeeded on this path before. In fact, this was a path with no destination. Thus, he needed to discuss it with his wife. Bewitching Maiden Rue and the others also joined this discussion, and the women all had their own opinions. Some were of the opinion that Ling Han didn't need to push himself so hard. Even if he slowed down and took things one step at a time, he would still eventually become the strongest heavenly veneration of the strongest. However, if he truly chose this path, he would very likely waste countless years of time. Meanwhile, the Empress resolutely supported Ling Han. In fact, she desired to accompany him and also take this path to become the most powerful first-tier heavenly venerate. After giving this some more thought, Ling Han ultimately decided to follow his heart. Otherwise, he would definitely have regrets. He would be left to ponder just how powerful he could have become if he had insisted on following this path. After making a decision, Ling Han could no longer be swayed. He went to the Celestial Administration to request leave. Generally speaking, everyone who became a pseudo-heavenly venerate would have to come here and volunteer their strength to resist hysteria. This wasn't the responsibility of so-and-so, but rather the responsibility of everyone. Thus, Ling Han's request for indefinite leave should have been impossible to approve. However, because his contributions were far too dazzling, had already charged into the general leaderboard, with his contributions being hundreds or even thousands of times greater than those of others. What harm would it do to grant him some leave? Thus, the two heavenly venerates responsible for this area passed on Ling Han's request for leave to the higher-ups. The reply was swift: request denied. This rejection was given by a higher-up in the 4th level. Apparently, this was a person with the surname He. His words were as follows: if one can enjoy special treatment in this place, then perhaps a person with great contributions can even flee in the face of battle. After hearing these words, Ling Han immediately guessed the identity of this person. This person was definitely He Yufeng's father. Fuck. How incredibly petty. Ling Han silently clenched his fists. However, without obtaining permission, he naturally couldn't leave the realm battlefield for extended periods of time. After all, if everyone became so relaxed and uncaring, how could they still resist hysteria? Thus, in the realm battlefield, discipline reigned above all else. Everyone had to obey orders. If Ling Han disregarded this rejection and chose to leave anyway, he would never need to return to this place. If he dared to return, he would definitely be captured and perhaps even executed on the spot. He would be regarded as a deserter. What should I do? Just as Ling Han was anxiously pondering over this, another order quickly arrived. This was an order from another higher-up, and the person who came to deliver it was Lin Piaoxue. Whose order was this? Lin Luo's. A 7th-tier heavenly venerate. His opinion was that Ling Han was a peerless prodigy who could potentially advance to the 7th tier in the future, which would allow him to change the tides of battle. Such a person should therefore be given more freedom, and not be weighed down by rigid rules and regulations. Just like that, the two heavenly venerates in the celestial administration quickly approved Ling Han's request for indefinite leave. Just like Wu Zhihong's words had reduced Wu Haoyang's breaking of the rules to nothing more than causing a ruckus, Lin Luo's words also possessed such power. 7th tier heavenly venerates were the most powerful in this world. "Thank you, Miss Lin," Ling Han said to Lin Piaoxue as he clasped his hands. She had helped him immensely. Lin Piaoxue smiled faintly, and said, "You're the second person to cause my grandfather to speak and bend the rules." Ling Han's interest was piqued, and he asked, "Who was the first?" "My auntie," Lin Piaoxue replied casually. Lin Yolian, the princess of the Lin clan. She was the most prodigious member of their clan, and she enjoyed an equal standing with Xin Qihu. She was regarded as someone who had the greatest chance to reach the 7th tier. Ling Han nodded, saying, "I definitely won't disappoint Lord Lin." Chapter 2740 Experiencing the Power of a Dimension. Chapter 2740 Experiencing the Power of a Dimension. 2740 Experiencing the Power of a Dimension. Ling Han set off, accompanied by the Empress and the others. He planned to invite the Karmic Life Heavenly Venerable, the large black dog, and the Rain Emperor as well. If they managed to succeed, they would become the most powerful, whether that was in the 1st tier, the 6th tier, or the 7th tier. It was anyone's guess whether they would succeed or not, but it was at least worth a try. However, it was a shame that only the Empress' request for leave was approved. She was his wife, so she could enjoy such a benefit. However, this was not the case for the others. The rules couldn't be bent again and again. After all, Ling Han wasn't a 7th tier heavenly venerate. Ling Han sighed with emotion. Where had Hunyao gone? How nice it would have been to go together, no? She's most likely on the 5th level, the Empress said. Ling Han nodded in agreement. Hunyao had been led away by a 4th tier heavenly venerate, so it was very likely that she was cultivating in the battlefield of the 5th level. She was definitely cultivating, as sending her into battle against Hysteria's army in that level would be no different than sending her to her death. We'll look for her when we return. The two of them held hands as they left. Meanwhile, the others all remained in the celestial guest residence due to the limitations of their cultivation level. They strolled casually, and it was as if they were a divine couple. If Hysteria didn't exist, how nice would it be for us to find a quiet place to settle, the Empress suddenly said with emotion. She had battled against Hysteria's army for many years, witnessing her fair share of blood and death. At this moment, she couldn't help but make such a remark. After we defeat Hysteria, we'll look for a quiet place to settle and have a bunch of children together, Ling Han said with a smile. There was a glimmer in the Empress' beautiful eyes as she lightly bit her bottom lip. She was indescribably beautiful. Ling Han was instantly seduced by her, and he immediately pulled her into the celestial guest residence. In any case, they had heaps of time to spare, so it wouldn't hurt to make some love. After journeying for more than 300 years, Ling Han and the Empress finally arrived at the border between the Flaming Frost realm and another dimension. This was the profound negative realm, a high-level dimension. There was no more battle here. However, different dimensions would repel each other, so even though there was no danger from other people here, there would definitely be dangers posed by nature. Bursts of chaotic air currents hammered down, flaunting the regulation transcending might of heaven and earth. Back when the celestial realm had collided with the foreign realm, a small world had been created. When this small world was eventually obliterated, the energy shockwaves that it unleashed caused even heavenly venerate Wu Le to suffer wounds when he traversed through it. This was a clear sign of heaven and earth's might. Why don't you enter the celestial guest residence as well? I'll take us through this area, Ling Han said. The Empress nodded and entered the celestial guest residence. She didn't act stubbornly. Ling Han channeled the indestructible heaven scroll, causing golden symbols to instantly pulsate all over his body, forming a golden bell around him. He then strode forward, charging headfirst into the currents of chaos. Boom! A devastating power surged over, causing the golden bell around Ling Han to shudder violently. It was as if the golden bell were about to shatter at any moment. He hurriedly hastened his steps as visible fractures appeared on the surface of the golden bell. After just a few minutes, these fractures had already become cracks that allowed wisps of chaotic energy to barge inside. Ling Han hurriedly channeled the indestructible heaven scroll with his full strength, repairing these cracks with great difficulty. This was utterly terrifying. While channeling the indestructible heaven scroll, his defense could rival that of a first-tier heavenly venerate. He gritted his teeth as he continued to endure the barrage of attacks. However, the further he ventured into this area, the more devastating the burst of chaotic air currents became. The symbols on the golden bell continued to dim, while Ling Han continued to forcefully inject his power to repair the bell, allowing the symbols to light up again. This was truly far too difficult. Ling Han's stamina was vast, yet he couldn't help but pant from time to time by now. He felt the urge to lie down and sleep for several years. One had to realize that he hadn't felt so exhausted even after battling against Wu Haoyang for tens of thousands of years. He spat blood, and veins bulged all over his body. However, he still continued to channel the indestructible heaven scroll no matter the cost. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a simple matter of him facing perilous danger. The celestial guest residence would be immediately crushed, bringing death to the women inside. For the sake of his lovers, Ling Han mustered an indomitable fighting spirit. It was a bitter battle, yet he continued to withstand and push forward, with his steps becoming quicker and quicker. After an entire day, Ling Han finally made his way out of the danger zone. Peng! He instantly collapsed to the ground. He felt as if his bones were all crushed, and it was as if his body had been drained of all energy. Only after lying down for 10 years did Ling Han finally pick himself back up. He felt like he had recovered 10% of his energy. He started to extract void particle energy. After another 3 years, he finally recovered 80% of his energy. He didn't sit around any longer, choosing to set off instead. The Empress also came back out, and the two of them started to investigate this heaven and earth. The spiritual qi in this dimension was weaker than that of the flaming frost realm, though it was still extremely rich and abundant. After all, this was a high-level dimension that was still countless times more powerful than the celestial realm. The two of them set off to look for a giant volcano. They desired to comprehend the unique power of this world, so the closer to the core of the world they were, the easier this would be. However, journeying to the core of the world was no easy task. According to Worley, they could reach the core of the world after finding a giant volcano and entering via its crater. After several months, the two of them found a giant volcano, which they immediately entered. Funnily, they came across a group of adventurers on their way, and these people actively warned them about the grave dangers of this area, most likely because of the Empress' beauty. When they saw Ling Han and the Empress directly leap into the crater of the volcano, their eyes almost bulged out of their heads. After looking around for a while, Ling Han and the Empress shook their heads. The magma in this area was extremely high in temperature, yet it would still struggle to melt divine metal. Such a task would take it countless years. Moreover, it was very shallow in depth, and it wasn't long before they reached the bottom. It was naturally impossible to reach the core of the world here. Ling Han and the Empress exited the volcano and continued their search. Of course, they didn't forget to cultivate while embarking on this expedition. Finally, after 700 years, they found a supervolcano. According to the legends of the profound negative realm, this was a definite forbidden land. Even celestial kings would be forced to stop in their tracks. However, Ling Han was fearless. After many years of recultivation, the Empress had also largely mastered the regulations of this realm. She could once again wield a battle prowess at the 9th heaven. They entered the volcano, and were immediately greeted by high temperatures. The Empress immediately let out an astonished yelp. The temperature here was far too high. Ling Han drew her into the celestial guest residence, and continued to venture on alone. This volcano was surprisingly deep, and Ling Han still had yet to reach the bottom after descending for 10 days. At this moment, the magma around him had already become a dull red. Its destructive power was immense, and Ling Han had no option but to channel the indestructible Heaven Scroll to resist its power. After descending for 3 years, Ling Han finally reached the bottom. There was no more magma here. Instead, he was surrounded by chunks of strange stone. Before him was an expanse of void, in the center of which hovered an 18-colored orb that radiated with an indescribable might. This was something that couldn't be approached and couldn't be touched. It was the core of the dimension. In fact, the might of heaven and earth was profound. However, limited by the regulations, only a small portion of this might could be unleashed. If anyone dared to touch the core of the dimension, however, they would suffer the full wrath of heaven and earth. That would be incredibly dangerous. 7th-tier heavenly venerates had the right to touch the cores of dimensions. In fact, they could even destroy these cores of dimensions. However, Ling Han certainly couldn't achieve this. He didn't dare to approach the core of the dimension at all, keeping his distance. If he walked any closer, he would be shattered into smithereens by the overwhelming power that the core possessed. Meanwhile, the Empress had also exited the celestial guest residence, and was sitting even further away from the core. The two of them started to comprehend the power of the dimension, grasping the unique power of the profound negative realm. If a 9th heaven celestial king wanted to advance to the pseudo-heavenly venerable tier, the first step would be to comprehend the unique power of the dimension. However, how many people could succeed? This was far, far too difficult. Thus, even with the Empress and Ling Han's prodigious talent, they were still unable to make any progress in the short term. Chapter 2741, 2741 Fusing Power Cores. Chapter 2741, 2741 Fusing Power Cores. 2741 Fusing Power Cores. The Empress still had yet to reach the peak stage of the 9th heaven, so it was extremely difficult for her to comprehend the power of the dimension. Meanwhile, because Ling Han had already been tempered by void particle energy, this formed an obstruction that caused his progress to be insanely slow. According to Worley's theory, it wouldn't be difficult for him to comprehend the unique power of the first dimension. This was because doing so was a necessary step. However, if he wanted to comprehend the power of a second or third dimension, the difficulty would grow in an exponential manner. Before long, his chance of succeeding would become infinitesimally close to zero. The two of them sat silently, with time quickly flying by. After 10 million years, the Empress finally reached the peak stage of the 9th heaven. After her celestial seed underwent 9 transformations, her ability to comprehend the fundamental power of the dimension grew significantly. After 20 million years, the Empress was finally able to interact with the unique power of the profound negative realm, extracting it to temper her body. This signified her transcendence above the celestial king tier and advance to the pseudo-heavenly venerable tier. The Empress faced heavenly tribulation, and this was naturally nothing to worry about. It was essentially no different from a 9th heaven heavenly tribulation. After another 10 million years, Ling Han was finally able to detect the unique power of the dimension as well, extracting it to form a core in his dantian. What he wanted to achieve was a pioneering accomplishment, something that no one else had ever achieved before. During his more than 100,000 years of analysis and calculations, Worley had calculated far more than just Ling Han's chances of success. He had also deducted potential avenues to reach such a goal. Otherwise, his calculations and predictions would have lacked a solid basis. With Worley's suggestion as a base, Ling Han further added some of his own understandings. He then started to experiment with his hypotheses. What was the use of extracting the power of a dimension? Inspired by the phenomenon of dimensions engulfing other dimensions, Ling Han treated himself as a core that could not only house all powers, but could also allow these powers to circulate and persist. In this way, he would no longer face the dilemma of his powers being rendered useless after he left the corresponding dimensions, and was thus unable to extract the corresponding powers. In his dantian, the wisps of power condensed into a core. This would become the source of his power. However, while extracting the unique power of the dimension might be easy, forming a self-sustaining supply of such power would be no easy task. The first step was always the most difficult. Ling Han didn't hurry, and his successive failures only worked to nurture his patience. Shortly afterward, the Empress also joined him in his investigations. Both of them were geniuses. Even though the Empress was slightly inferior, an extra mind was still definitely helpful to the cause. They continued to channel their greatest eternity everlasting physiques, accelerating the flow of time. However, the higher one's cultivation, the more difficult it would be to accelerate or decelerate the flow of time for oneself. Because of this, even though they had both already reached the pseudo-heavenly venerable tier, they were still only able to accelerate the flow of time 1,000-fold. This was already a good result. After all, if a pseudo-heavenly venerate entered time cultivation chambers, nothing at all would happen. The flow of time wouldn't even double. They experienced failure after failure, reaching a point where even the Empress started to feel frustrated and irritated. Fortunately, Ling Han was there to calm her down, allowing her to regain composure and continue working toward their goal. During the 5th cycle of 100 million years, Ling Han finally achieved success. He managed to form a core inside his body, one that looked just like the core of the dimension before him. This core endlessly provided him with power that was unique to this dimension. Boom! Power surged, yet it was unable to leave his body. It could only temper his physique. This was because he was still a pseudo-heavenly venerate. This was the result that Ling Han was looking for. Right now, he had no desire to advance to the heavenly venerable tier. Under Ling Han's patient teaching, the Empress also managed to form a core. This was a comparatively simple task. However, the task of extracting the power of numerous dimensions, fusing it into the core, and then having the core provide all the different unique powers of the dimensions was a far more challenging task. The more powers they fused, the more difficult this would become. Counting briefly, the two of them had already experienced 500 billion years. This was an astounding length of time. They left the profound negative realm, and set off for the next realm. Just like before, they spent numerous years searching for a way to approach the core of the dimension. Afterward, they sat beside the core, and attempted to interact with the power that it possessed. This was an insanely difficult task. Regardless of whether it was the fundamental power of the Genesis world or the unique powers of these dimensions, they would all innately repel one another. Fortunately, this was only a difficulty and not an impossibility. After all, they only possessed a small number of unique powers. After 20 million years, they both managed to detect the unique power. It was at this moment that the true problem revealed itself. They needed to fuse this power into their core as well, making it become a source for future power. They didn't want to treat this power as a disposable matter, something that would become useless after a single use. They made several attempts and experienced several failures. Only after another 10 million years did they finally succeed. Two different powers. Ling Han sensed the two powers, and found that they were still far from being able to rival void particle energy. This still wasn't enough. It was far from being enough. The two of them set off again, arriving at the 3rd dimension. They repeated the same process again. This time, it took them 50 million years to finally succeed. They then set off for the 4th dimension, spending more than 70 million years there. Only then did they head toward the 5th dimension. The time they spent in each dimension became longer and longer, and this was because their progress was becoming slower and slower. When they arrived at the 10th dimension, they failed to make any progress even after 100 million years. Ling Han silently made some comparisons in his mind. The unique powers inside his body could almost rival the void particle energy already. In other words, if he returned to the flaming frost realm at this moment, he would definitely be the strongest in his cultivation level regardless of which tier heavenly venerate he became. However, this was far too simple. Ling Han was sure that he wasn't the only one to come up with this idea. After all, which of Lin Luo, Zhu Heng, and the others wasn't a prodigy among prodigies? Would they not have attempted this? Perhaps many elites had attempted this before. It was just that they had experienced mixed results. Perhaps some had fused together the power of 10 dimensions, while others had fused together the power of 20. Perhaps some had even fused together the power of 30 or 50. I have to become the strongest. Ling Han made up his mind. Only 100 million years had passed, so how could he give up so easily? Another 100 million years passed, and Ling Han was finally able to detect the power of this dimension. He then spent 30 million years fusing this power into his core. The difficulty of fusing each subsequent power would rise exponentially, so there would eventually come a stage where Ling Han would be unable to succeed even if his lifespan were limitless. The Empress was much slower, and it was clear that her talent was ultimately inferior to Ling Han's. You can head off to the next dimension first. I'll look for you after I finish here, the Empress said. Ling Han thought for a moment before replying, all right. He set off for the next dimension, leaving marks that only the Empress would understand along the way. With his current heavenly venerable tear power, he could ensure that these marks would remain for all eternity. Time whizzed by like an arrow. 100 million years, 10 billion years, 100 billion years, 1 trillion years. Ling Han continued to travel through dimensions, almost forgetting the concept of time. He only knew that inside the celestial guest residence, bewitching Maiden Ru had already reached the peak stage of the ninth heaven. As for the other women, their talent was limited, so being forcefully raised to the celestial king tier where they could enjoy an indestructible body was already their absolute limit. 2 billion years, 5 billion years, 10 billion years, and then one epoch. Ling Han was already unable to keep track of how many dimensions he had traveled to. He only knew that the core inside his body had already grown to a gigantic size. He was about to reach his limit. If he failed to control this core, he would inevitably face self-destruction. Ling Han decided to return after extracting the power of this dimension. He still needed to leave some space for the flaming frost realm, the only transcendent dimension in the Genesis world. He naturally wouldn't abandon such a power. He calmly strolled around, exuding a sense of boundless loneliness. Taking into account the acceleration of time, he had already cultivated for a whopping 1,000 epochs. In fact, this had already exceeded the lifespan of most dimensions. He had already traveled to all high-level dimensions and even medium-level dimensions. Right now, he was in a low-level dimension. The spiritual chi here was observably scarcer. Just like before, he started to search for a path toward the core of the dimension. At this moment, however, he suddenly felt a strong sense of apprehension. Chapter 2742, 2742 Ling Feifen. Chapter 2742, 2742 Ling Feifen. 2742 Ling Feifen. Danger. This was Ling Han's first reaction. With his cultivation, if he entered someplace dangerous, his divine sense would immediately react and give him a warning. However, he immediately shook his head. This place was peaceful and tranquil, and it didn't seem like a dangerous place no matter how he looked at it. Moreover, his divine sense wouldn't miss any detail, so he was certain that no elite had approached him. Perhaps someone dear to him had come across trouble? This was also impossible. Such a feeling would only occur if both parties were in the same dimension. However, his lovers were all inside the celestial guest residence, and the Empress was definitely still in another dimension. Thus, how could he experience such a feeling? He brushed it off as a mistaken sensation. He had been cultivating in earnest for far too long, so perhaps his brain was a bit muddled. He decided to ignore it. However, after a short while, this feeling of apprehension became increasingly strong, so much so that he was unable to ignore it any longer. What's going on? Ling Han decided to put aside the task of searching for the core of the dimension first. He needed to deal with this sensation, or else he would be unable to cultivate properly. This was the martial crystalline realm, a low-level dimension. The most powerful elites in this realm were 7 second-tier heavenly venerates. Because this dimension was located much too far away, they had failed to receive the command of the Flaming Frost realm. Thus, they remained as the rulers and overlords of this dimension. Of course, second-tier heavenly venerates were indeed very powerful as well. In any case, this was also the limit of what this low-level dimension could hold. Otherwise, if they were more powerful and didn't leave, it would be this dimension that crumbled and vanished. In fact, it wasn't that the Flaming Frost realm couldn't extend its influence to this dimension. Rather, It was that all dimensions starting from the martial crystalline realm were low-level dimensions. They possessed far too few elites, so the elites from the Flaming Frost realm chose not to waste their time visiting these dimensions. The cultivators here were extremely committed to the realm wars, and this was because the medium-level dimension above them hadn't launched an invasion against them. As such, they could unleash their full power at the low-level dimension beneath them. Right now, they were on the cusp of victory. Once their dimension advanced, the upper limit of their cultivation level would also be increased. The second-tier Heavenly Venerates all eagerly anticipated the arrival of such a day. The clan. That unfilial girl still hasn't changed her mind yet? Antaiun asked, his face filled with rage and his might overwhelming. This was only natural. He was a second-tier Heavenly Venerate, so just a glare from him could kill a celestial king at the peak stage of the 9th heaven. Father, she's your daughter. Don't you understand her temper? A young man beside him said with a bitter smile. There were 9 ribbons of iridescent light around him, signifying his status as a 9th heaven celestial king. This was a low-level dimension, so a second-tier Heavenly Venerate and a 9th heaven celestial king were a formidable force that could crush the world. Antaiun raised his hand, wanting to slam it down on the armrest of his chair. However, after holding his hand in the air for a while, he ultimately decided against slamming it down. Instead, he heaved a long sigh, saying, I pampered that girl far too much, never interfering in her matters. Now what? She's actually discussing marriage with those dogs from the Promise City realm. Where does that leave me? The Promise City realm was the dimension that the martial crystalline realm was attempting to destroy and engulf. That little bastard. He actually dared to seduce my daughter. If I capture him, I'll definitely hack him into 1,000 pieces. Antaiun said with a humph. Father. Right at this moment, a young man ran inside, saying, I've just received this report. Our army achieved an overwhelming victory, and we captured a large number of enemy cultivators. The brat Ling Feifen is also among them. Ha ha. After faltering for a brief moment, Antaiun immediately roared with laughter. Bring him over. I've already sent someone over to grab him, the young man replied. He was also a 9th heaven celestial king, and he was Antaiun's second son, Ping Hai. The other 9th heaven celestial king hesitated for a bit before saying, Father, are you truly going to kill him? Little sister doesn't seem like she's playing around this time. What if she becomes too heartbroken? He was Antaiun's eldest son, Ping Tian. Antaiun glared at him, saying, he's a dog bastard from the Promise City realm. If I wed my precious daughter to him, wouldn't I essentially be colluding with the enemy? I'm definitely going to smack that brat to death. Only after a month was Ling Feifen finally brought to the clan. After all, none of them were Heavenly Venerates, so their speed naturally wasn't impressive. Antaiun personally walked out of the clan residence. He wanted to see for himself just how extraordinary this Ling Feifen was, one that he could actually capture the heart of his dear daughter. A youth sat on the ground, with no shackles on his body. However, his cultivation had already been sealed. Even if no one guarded him, he would still be unable to run very far in a day. A mountain river tier cultivator would be able to catch up to him in a single stride. Thus, this young man was sitting on the ground all alone, an indifferent smile on his face. If one looked closely, one would find that his appearance shared a 30% similarity with Ling Han's. Not only was his appearance similar, but even his disposition was similar. Antaiun humphed, saying, You still dare to remain seated after seeing me? Ling Feifen picked himself up and clasped his hands, bowing in respect. Antaiun felt even more displeased. How had this coward captured his daughter's heart? My respects to father-in-law, Ling Feifen said. Antaiun's jaw instantly dropped, speechless. Fuck. This was no coward at all. This was a fearless hooligan, Pu. And Ping Hai couldn't help but splutter with laughter. Pa. Antaiun instantly smacked him across the head. This brat actually dared to laugh at his father. Had he grown tired of living? And Ping Hai bared his teeth. His father was seething with anger, so that smack had truly been painful. You only just advanced to the Celestial King tier, so what makes you think you deserve to become my son-in-law? Antaiun asked. Even though he detested this brat who had seduced his daughter, he had to admit that he was fairly brave. It was also because of this that he was willing to continue this conversation. Ling Feifen wore an apologetic expression as he replied, "In fact, there's nothing special about me. It's just that I'm a bit handsome, I'm an honest person, and also have huge potential that could see me become a heavenly venerate in the future." The corners of Antayun's mouth twitched upon hearing this. "Are you sure you're being apologetic? Are you not just praising yourself?" He detested this kind of careless and superficially clever person. Kill him, he said with a wave of his hand. "Father! Father!" a woman cried from inside the residence. A beautiful girl with delicate features then ran over, with An Pingtian trailing behind her. She grabbed Antayun's elbow, and said, "Father, you can't kill him." This woman was Antayun's only daughter and youngest child, Anshioa. She was only a few million years old, and she enjoyed much doting from Antayun. Antayun couldn't help but shoot a glare at his eldest son. He had told him to keep an eye on her and stop her from coming out, yet he had treated his words as nothing but just that, words. Otherwise, with his strength as a ninth heaven celestial king, how could he possibly fail to catch up to his younger sister, someone who had only just become a celestial king? He twirled his beard, and asked, "Why can't I kill him?" And Shioa gritted her teeth, and said, Because I'm already pregnant with his child." "Ha!" Ling Feifen's jaw instantly dropped to the ground. "I've only touched your hand," he thought to himself. "You can even get pregnant from that. She's truly giving it her all to save me." Meanwhile, Antayun became wild with rage, his hair billowing even though there was no wind. He glared at Ling Feifen with a wicked expression, saying, "Very well, brat. How very impudent of you. You even dared to lay hands on my daughter." Right now, he simply wanted to kill this brat. He reached over to grab Ling Feifen. "Father, if you dare to touch him, I'll commit suicide." And Shioa hurriedly shouted, her voice firm and resolute. Chapter 2743, 2743 Grandson. Chapter 2743, 2743 Grandson. 2743 Grandson. Antayun forcefully retracted his hand. However, with a single thought, Anshioa instantly collapsed to the ground. He was far too powerful, so there was absolutely no need for him to get physical to deal with a measly first heaven celestial king. "Ping Tian, take your sister back inside," he commanded. "Father," and Ping Tian stepped forward, wanting to persuade his father. Antayun shot a glare at him. And Ping Tian instantly fell silent, not daring to say another word. In the An clan, only his younger sister wasn't afraid of their father. He and his 6 brothers all respected and feared him. Antayun turned his gaze back to Ling Feifen. "This brat had to die." Ling Feifen sighed, saying, "By the looks of it, I'm going to die here today. Father-in-law, aren't you going to give it some more consideration? A son-in-law as outstanding as me is truly very difficult to find. You're already staring death in the face, yet you still insist on speaking with such a glib tongue." Antayun was even more displeased. He was fonder of modest and earnest children such as the 3rd son of the Yang clan. He had only cultivated for 3 billion years, yet he had already become a 9th heaven celestial king. In the future, he had the ability to become a heavenly venerate. Only such kind of person was worthy of his daughter. "Heh!" He suddenly faltered, looking up at the sky. Whoosh! A figure descended, his hair disheveled and covering his appearance. His clothes were also in tatters, and it was as if he were a beggar. This was naturally Ling Han. He had followed the source of his apprehension, and that had brought him all the way here. The captured young man was the source of his apprehension. Who was this? Why did he cause his heart to waver? Ling Han had been cultivating in earnest for the past epoch, so he hadn't paid any attention to his appearance. Even though his clothes were all treasures, the harsh environments that he traveled through caused them to gradually experience decay. And Ping Hai immediately stepped forward, and asked, "Friend, who are you?" Ling Han didn't reply, instead staring at Ling Feifen. Why did this person cause his heart to waver? It was very clear that this person was in a perilous situation, facing the risk of death at any moment. However, what did this have to do with him? Why is this person's appearance so similar to mine? What's your name? Ling Han asked. When he spoke the first word, there was struggle in his voice. Indeed, this was his first time speaking in almost an entire epoch. However, when he reached the last word, he had already largely recovered, with his voice exuding a sense of indescribable might. This junior is Ling Feifen. My respects to senior, Ling Feifen hurriedly replied. This person was his potential savior, so he naturally had to latch on with both hands. Ling Feifen? Ling Han murmured. This person's surname was actually Ling as well. Perhaps this was his descendant. However, Ling Zhenxue was his only son, so perhaps this was his grandson? Or great-grandson? You too. And Pinghai said in rage. He was a ninth heaven celestial king, after all, so were his words really so useless? Moreover, there was still a second-tier heavenly venerate before them. Was it truly okay for them to ignore him? What's your relationship with Ling Zhenxue? Ling Han asked. Ling Feifen was truly astonished upon hearing this. He had only planned to randomly grab onto any potential savior, yet this person truly had a deep relationship with the Ling clan. He faltered for a moment before replying, "He's my father." He then asked, "Senior, you are?" "He's my grandson." Ling Han was astonished. The brat Ling Zhenxue had already given him a grandson. However, upon further thought, an entire epoch had already passed, so to say nothing of a grandson, he should have already had great-great-great-great-grandchildren. You too. And Pinghai shouted through gritted teeth. They were taking things much too far. Pinghai. And Taiyun said in a solemn voice. Even though the man before them was disheveled and in tattered clothing, and even though he didn't exude a single wisp of energy, he still gave him a feeling of extreme danger. Where had this elite come from? However, and Pinghai didn't possess the good judgment of his father. In his eyes, he had already seen all of the heavenly venerates of this realm, and Ling Han wasn't among the ranks of the ninth heaven celestial kings. Thus, what did he need to be afraid of? "I'll capture him," he said as he reached over, grabbing at Ling Han. A murderous glint flashed across Ling Han's eyes. In the past, hundreds of thousands of pseudo-heavenly venerates had died at his hands, yet a measly ninth heaven celestial king dared to attack him. However, he immediately remembered that this wasn't the realm battlefield. This person wasn't a mortal enemy. Thud, thud, thud. After seeing Ling Han's glare, and Pinghai involuntarily stumbled back. It was as if a legendary beast had locked its eyes on him, causing him to perspire in terror. And Taiyun had no time to console his son. He stared at Ling Han and said in a solemn voice, "Friend, you're an elite from which place?" The words of a second-tier heavenly venerate were naturally different. Wind and clouds suddenly swirled, with even heaven and earth starting to wail. Only at this moment did Ling Han turn his gaze to Taiyun. He nodded, and replied, "My name is Ling Han." Pu. Ling Feifen coughed and spluttered upon hearing this. This person was actually his grandfather. Fuck. How could there be such a coincidence? Hadn't his grandfather gone to the transcendent dimension? Why had he suddenly appeared here? "Grandpa," he instinctively called. "Ling Han?" And Taiyun murmured. He had never heard this name before. However, since Ling Feifen was referring to him as Grandpa, this person was most likely an elite from the Promised City realm. In other words, he was an enemy. Ling Han turned to Ling Feifen, and asked, "What's going on?" Even though Ling Feifen couldn't confirm Ling Han's identity, his relationship with Ensure was no big secret. Thus, he explained the situation to Ling Han. Ling Han nodded in understanding. He then turned to Taiyun, and said, "Since the love between them is mutual, why stand in their way?" "Rubbish. Of course you're happy. After all, the one being tricked away isn't your daughter." And Taiyun muttered in his mind. Upon further thought, he realized that if the two youths truly tied the knot, wouldn't he become Ling Han's junior? Fuck. How could he allow that? He was the ruler of this dimension. At most, the others could only enjoy a status equal to his. How could they enjoy a status above him? Is he worthy? And Taiyun asked as he pointed at Ling Feifen. Ling Han smiled, replying, "He's my grandson, so of course he's worthy." Even though his voice was calm, it was filled with a sense of dominance. Even Taiyun faltered upon hearing this. However, he immediately bared his teeth. Sure enough, these two shared a bloodline. The grandson was glib of tongue, and his grandfather was also confident for apparently no reason. The Promised City realm was already on the verge of destruction, yet Ling Han was still filled with such confidence. "Then I must ask for a lesson to see just how capable you are," Taiyun said in a baleful voice. Ling Han was slightly hesitant as he stood with his hands clasped behind his back. If he had spent all of his time on increasing his cultivation level, he would have at least reached the 3rd tier or 4th tier. At that time, he could easily kill a 2nd tier heavenly venerate with a single smack. In reality, however, he had spent all of his time and effort on fusing and condensing his core. Thus, even though his cultivation level hadn't increased, his battle prowess had definitely soared to great heights. As for how high, even Ling Han didn't know. It had already been a very long time since his last battle. What if his strike was too powerful, and he accidentally smacked Taiyun to death? "You're afraid?" Taiyun asked. He had truly been enraged by the grandfather and grandson duo of the Ling clan. It was because of this that he uttered such a taunt. Ling Han replied honestly, "I'm considering how much power I should use. Otherwise, it won't be good if I accidentally smack you dead." Fuck. Ling Feifen immediately nodded in his mind. This was definitely his grandfather. They were definitely related by blood. His manner of speaking was exactly the same as his. As for whether Ling Han was truly capable, hopefully, his words weren't empty threats. Chapter 2744, 2744 Dare to Battle? Chapter 2744, 2744 Dare to Battle? 2744 Dare to Battle? An alliance agreed upon verbally was naturally unreliable, so having the two clans tied together through marriage was naturally far more secure. One was the most outstanding son of the Yang clan, and one was the young princess of the An clan. Such a marriage would naturally solidify their alliance, making it turn into an indestructible one. And Taiyun was instantly enticed by this offer. He had already been satisfied with Yang Xianlong to begin with, so adding to that an alliance, he felt an urge to accept this offer with no further thought. Ling Feifen was extremely anxious, and he hurriedly turned to Ling Han, shouting, "Grandpa." If his grandfather didn't say anything, his granddaughter-in-law would disappear just like that. Ling Han sighed upon hearing this. Why was he forced into a fight just to get a granddaughter-in-law? Was he truly a magnet for trouble? Nephew, he said. Pu. Ling Feifen felt a strong urge to vomit blood. Meanwhile, Yang Xianlong and Yang Zhihe both glanced over with confused expressions. Who was this disheveled beggar? He was actually referring to Taiyun as nephew? How did he dare? That was a 2nd tier heavenly venerate. Taiyun's expression was dark, and it was as if flames were about to burst from his eyes. He could barely contain his murderous urge. Ling Han waved his hands with a smile, saying, all right, let's not talk about this first. I've also brought my grandson here today to make an offer of marriage. I hope the An clan can agree to this proposal." "All right," Taiyun said coldly. Yang Xuanlong's expression instantly changed upon hearing this. However, Yang Zhihe wasn't worried at all. He understood Taiyun very well. "Sure enough," Taiyun continued, "which maidservant have you set your eyes on?" "She's all yours." Ling Han had continued to refer to him as nephew time and time again just then, so now it was his turn to return the favor. Ling Han faltered for a moment before roaring with laughter, and saying, "Who would have thought? You're also a fairly humorous person, huh? I'm especially eager to meet my granddaughter-in-law now. She's likely also a very interesting person. See, what's so bad about my grandson? Even though his cultivation is slightly weaker, defeating that small fry at the same cultivation will be as easy as a wave of his hand," Ling Han said as he wrapped an arm around Ling Feifen's shoulder. He then pointed his finger at Yang Xianlong. Yang Xianlong was infuriated. So be it if he wanted to praise his own grandson. But was it really necessary to use him as a stepping stone? He humphed, and said, I can suppress such trash with a simple turn of my palm. Ling Feifen naturally wouldn't back down. He pointed at Yang Xianlong, and said, if we battle at the same cultivation level, you're nothing but an insect. I can crush you to death with a single stomp. Ling Han was all smiles upon hearing this. Ling Zhenxue was far too modest and calm, and that made him no fun at all. He was nowhere near as interesting as this grandson. Do you dare to battle? Ling Han asked, further fanning the flames. Chapter 2745, 2745 Special Training. Chapter 2745, 2745 Special Training. 2745 Special Training. New to march forward. This time, I'll leave a wisp of power in your body. If your opponent unleashes a heavenly venerate technique, activate this power and use it to rival him. Otherwise, battle with your own strength. Okay, Ling Feifen said with a nod. After traveling for one epoch, Ling Han had traversed through heaven knew how many dimensions. Even if he weren't specifically looking for them, he still managed to obtain many celestial medicines and divine metals. However, trying to rapidly raise Ling Feifen's strength would still be an impossible task. Thus, he planned to activate the power of his core to leave a wisp of power in Ling Feifen's body. That way, he could use it to deal with his opponent's heavenly venerate technique. If it were any other person, even if it were the Empress, Liu Yutong, or one of the other women, Ling Han would be unable to do this. However, Ling Feifen shared his blood, and he was an extension of his life. Thus, this possibility could be achieved. Ling Han carefully activated his core. If it reached a critical stage of circulation, even Ling Han would be ruthlessly blown apart. A single sliver at a time, Ling Han carefully manipulated this power. This power couldn't exit his body, yet thanks to their blood relation, wisps of power could still flow into Ling Feifen and temper his body. Ling Han was astonished by how smoothly things went. He had initially thought that he could only leave a wisp of this power in Ling Feifen's body. Unexpectedly, however, he could even use it to temper his body. Ling Feifen had only just advanced to the Celestial King tier, so if he tempered his grandson's body for close to 10 years, the results would most likely be astonishing. Ah! However, Ling Feifen screamed in agony. He had never practiced body arts before, so his physique wasn't especially powerful. With this power wantonly coursing through his body, he naturally couldn't help but scream. His skin started to crack, with blood spraying into the air. He appeared as miserable as could be. However, Ling Han acted as if he couldn't see this. If Ling Feifen failed to endure even this, then there would be no need for him to screw over the young girl from the clan. He would be better off training for another few 100 million years. With the acceleration of time, it wasn't long before 9 years flowed by. Ling Han finally retracted his hands. Meanwhile, Ling Feifen scrambled up and fled as quickly as he could. It was as if Ling Han were a terrifying beast. He swore that he would never do this again. Test your strength, Ling Han said. Ling Feifen swung his arm before involuntarily exclaiming, the speed of my fist has increased several hundredfold. This was simply unfathomable. Just based on this fact alone, his strength could already increase several dozen-fold or even several hundred-fold. Chapter 2746, 2746 Might Unleashed. Chapter 2746, 2746 Might Unleashed. 2746 Might Unleashed. Ling Feifen was astonished as he looked at Ling Han. Was this Ling Han's ability? This was far too incredible. In just 3 days, even though he felt like several years had passed, his strength had undergone a complete transformation. This was absolutely godly. Stinky brat, hurry up and give yourself a clean. It's time to fight for your wife, Ling Han said as he kicked his grandson in the rear. Ling Feifen came to his senses, and immediately scampered off. After a while, Ling Han and Ling Feifen left the celestial guest residence and headed back to the clan. It had to be said that the clan was an extremely capable clan. In less than 3 days, they had already finished the reconstruction of the clan, which exuded the domineering aura of a heavenly venerable tier clan. In fact, weaker-willed people wouldn't even be able to approach the clan. Instead, they would go weak in the knees. Ling Han appeared as calm as could be as he walked with his hands clasped behind his back. Meanwhile, Ling Feifen obediently followed after him. "How are your parents?" Ling Han asked. "They're as lovey-dovey as could be. It's as if they're joined together at the hip, and they're never apart from each other no matter what they do," Ling Feifen replied as he fiddled around with a greatsword in his hand. This was a celestial tool that Ling Han had only just forged for him. With Ling Han's current ability, forging a divine metal billet into a finished weapon was naturally as simple as a single thought. They're traveling and sightseeing all the time, and they even traveled through numerous dimensions. Right now, they're helping the Promise City realm resist invasion. Thanks to them, I was forced to become a soldier as well. In the end, I was taken prisoner, Ling Feifen said through sighs. Ling Han was surprised upon hearing this. Able to travel through dimensions? Had Ling Zhenxue already become a heavenly venerate? "What cultivation is your father at?" Ling Han asked. "Ninth heaven celestial king." Ling Han was even more surprised. As a ninth heaven celestial king, he could already travel through the dimensions. Did he truly possess such strength? Father was extremely fortunate, and he obtained an extremely mysterious pearl. As long as he activates it, he can conceal his presence such that even heavenly venerates can't discover him, Ling Feifen explained. Only at this moment did Ling Han understand. Otherwise, he refused to believe that a ninth heaven celestial king could truly travel through dimensions. In any case, traveling through the myriad worlds might allow Ling Zhenxue to discover rare opportunities that could potentially help him become a heavenly venerate. This was Ling Zhenxue's cultivation method. As they chatted, they eventually arrived before the gates of the clan. There was already a person waiting for them, and upon seeing their arrival, they immediately bowed and said, "Our respects to Lord." This greeting was aimed at Ling Han, yet Ling Feifen proudly nodded in response as if the greeting were aimed at him. This almost angered the person to death was a third heaven celestial king. Ling Han raised a hand and said, "Lead the way." The third heaven celestial king didn't dare to defy Ling Han, so he obediently led the way. A short while later, the three of them arrived at the guest hall, wherein Taiyun and Yang Zhihe were sitting in the master seat and guest seat, respectively. Meanwhile, Anshua and Yang Shenlong were standing behind them. Anshua's eyes instantly lit up when she saw Ling Feifen. Yang Shenlong saw this, and he involuntarily clenched his fists, swearing in his mind that he would definitely find an opportunity to kill Ling Feifen in a while. Yang Shenlong had only met Anshua a few times before, so it couldn't be said that he liked her. However, for the sake of his father's grand plan, it was vital that he married Anshua. In any case, he wasn't against this, as Anshua was genuinely a noble woman who was extremely delicate and beautiful. She was completely worthy of him. Thus, he didn't oppose this marriage. However, she had yet to be married, yet she was already making eyes at another man. How could he accept this? How could he not develop killing intent? Wasn't the greatest hate of a man being cucked by someone else? "Begin the battle," Taiyun said with a wave of his hand. A small tower appeared in mid-air, measuring 9 levels in height. It was golden in color and exuding an aura of chaos as if it belonged to the primal beginning of heaven and earth. This was a heavenly venerate tool. This was a battle between two celestial kings, so it was naturally better for them to do battle inside there. Otherwise, the newly reconstructed clan might be obliterated again. The two youths leaped toward the tower. Anshua couldn't help but say, "Be careful, Feifen." "Rest assured, I can take on 10 of this trash by myself," Ling Feifen said with a wave of his hand. He appeared as casual as could be. Yang Shenlong was almost angered to death, with his killing intent becoming even more intense. He stepped into the treasured tower, deciding that he would definitely kill Ling Feifen. Even Taiyun and Yang Zhihe wore displeased expressions, with Taiyun saying, "Shua, ladies need to be more reserved and modest." As for Yang Zhihe, he humphed to express his displeasure. Meanwhile, Ling Han laughed heartily, saying, "Young lady, come here, come here." Shua already knew his identity, so she immediately walked over, curtsying slightly and saying, My respects to Grandpa. Ling Han retrieved a spatial god tool, holding it over, and saying, "Here, a greeting gift, take it." "Thank you, Grandpa," and Xiao said obediently. However, upon observing it with her divine sense, she couldn't help but gasp. There were countless high-level celestial medicines inside this spatial god tool, and there were even several pieces of divine metal. Their value was immense. This greeting gift was absolutely exquisite. Meanwhile, inside the heavenly venerate tool, the battle between Ling Feifen and Yang Shenlong had also begun. Inside this space, everything was subject to Entayun's whims. Thus, he commanded the heavenly venerate tool to suppress Yang Xuanlong's cultivation to the first heaven. Even so, Yang Shenlong definitely still possessed a huge advantage. Firstly, his cultivation was at the peak stage of the first heaven. Secondly, he was more familiar with the regulations, so he was naturally able to channel them with more nuance and skill. However, Ling Feifen's response astonished him greatly. This was because Ling Feifen didn't attempt to draw on the regulations or whatnot. Instead, he immediately charged over to pummel the opponent. This was far too classless. Was such close-quarters combat any different from a scuffle between hooligans? Was his opponent really a celestial king? However, he immediately discovered that Ling Feifen's punches were astonishingly powerful, with his chest throbbing with each punch that he withstood. He felt terrible, and he truly wanted to cough blood. Moreover, not only were Ling Feifen's punches powerful, but they were also quick. It wasn't long before he couldn't keep up. He had initially been filled with confidence. After all, what did it matter even if his opponent were genuinely freakish? He could still unleash his heavenly venerate techniques. This was something that Ling Feifen definitely couldn't block. Now, however, what opportunity did he have to unleash the heavenly venerate technique? Peng, peng, peng. Ling Feifen's fists rained down with fury, giving Yang Shenlong no opportunity to unleash his trump card. "Incapable scum, you actually dared to lay eyes on my wife." Ling Feifen spat with extreme disdain as he continued to pummel his opponent. Yang Shenlong was completely unable to reply. All he could do was defend with all his might. However, he was bound to make a mistake. One could fail in their attacks 100 times or 10,000 times with no consequence at all. However, defending was different, and as long as a single mistake was committed, the consequences would be catastrophic. Under Ling Feifen's relentless attacks, Yang Shenlong was eventually struck by a fist, which caused his bones to immediately snap. He groaned in pain. At the same time, he retreated in a hurry. If they continued to battle head-on, he would definitely be defeated. After creating enough distance, he started preparing his trump card. "Ling Feifen, it all ends now," he roared as he raised his hands to the sky, flickers of white flames dancing across his palms. They were radiant daylight flames, capable of annihilating all matter. However, Ling Feifen couldn't help but feel slightly disappointed. He had initially thought that his furious attacks would strip Yang Shenlong of the opportunity to launch his trump card. However, prodigies were prodigies, after all, and Yang Shenlong was ultimately able to break free from his attacks. He shook his hands, feeling intense pain in his bones. Indeed, his body art had been rapidly elevated in just a few days, meaning that he didn't possess a physique powerful enough to match it. Thus, the relentless attacks just then had placed a huge burden on his body. "Stop dreaming. Your only fate is to be pummeled into paste," Ling Feifen said with a laugh. Chapter 2747, 2747 You're a pseudo-heavenly venerate. Chapter 2747, 2747 You're a pseudo-heavenly venerate. 2747 You're a pseudo-heavenly venerate. In the outside world, Entayun and Yang Zhihe were both astounded. Ling Feifen was actually this powerful. Using body arts to suppress one's opponent is the battle technique of heavenly venerates. Don't tell me that this brat has already interacted with the unique power of heaven and earth and used it to temper his body. The two heavenly venerates exchanged a confused look. A first heaven celestial king being able to interact with the unique power of the realm? This was simply unfathomable, regardless of how prodigious one was. However, apart from this, was there any other explanation? And Taiyun couldn't help but waver. Yang Xianlong only possessed the ability to potentially become a heavenly venerate, yet if Ling Feifan had truly interacted with the unique power of heaven and earth, he was destined to eventually become a heavenly venerate. In fact, he didn't really care which dimension Ling Feifan was from. After all, a mighty heavenly venerate naturally possessed an equally broad mind. What he cared about more were potential and natural disposition. Even Enshiua was surprised. In the eyes of a girl in love, their lover would naturally be all-capable. However, she was also a celestial king, and she was more so the daughter of a heavenly venerate. Thus, her observation skills were naturally extraordinary. In the past, Ling Feifan definitely hadn't been so powerful. What's going on? Meanwhile, Ling Han was slightly unsatisfied. In fact, Ling Feifan's abilities included far more than just this. However, his physique was inferior, so it prevented him from unleashing any more power. Otherwise, his own body would collapse first. How should I teach the indestructible Heaven's Scroll to my grandson? Ling Han mulled over this problem. He could borrow the Black Tower, and use it to forcefully teach his grandson, just like how he had learned it. Otherwise, he could modify the indestructible Heaven's Scroll and structure it like the 9 Transformations Divine Scroll. That way, it could be learned one scroll at a time before ultimately being combined together. However, borrowing the Black Tower at this moment would be impossible. Thus, Ling Han felt like the latter option was the more reliable one. He immediately started to ponder this problem, thinking about how he could deconstruct the indestructible Heaven's Scroll. Meanwhile, inside the Heavenly Venerate tool, Yang Xianlong started to launch his counterattack. He charged at Ling Feifan, unleashing the radiant flames from his palm as he did so, with the flames transforming into 2 white snakes that lunged at Ling Feifan. Ling Feifan roared with laughter, unafraid as he faced this attack head-on. "You're seeking death," Yang Xianlong said in his mind. After channeling this Heavenly Venerate technique, his battle prowess could rival that of Third Heaven Celestial Kings. This certainly wasn't something that newbie Celestial Kings could rival. "Die. Hurry up and die." Wang. When the flaming white snakes crashed into Ling Feifan, a golden bell immediately materialized around him, with numerous golden symbols pulsating on its surface. The golden bell successfully stopped the white snakes in their tracks, preventing them from advancing another inch. Yang Xuanlong's jaw involuntarily fell to the ground. How was this possible? He had never believed that Ling Feifan could also possess a heavenly venerate technique, and the reason for this was simple. It would be useless even if Ling Feifan had the aid of a heavenly venerate, as the bare minimum requirement for channeling a heavenly venerate technique was reaching the 9th heaven. For example, even he could only channel a heavenly venerate technique for 15 minutes at most. Even so, he would still end up wounded and completely exhausted. Now, however, Ling Feifan had actually blocked his heavenly venerate technique. There was only one explanation: he had also mastered a heavenly venerate technique. How was this possible? His eyes bulged in disbelief. He had initially thought that he could crush his opponent with ease, yet it seemed like he was the one who was about to be slain in the end. Ha ha ha. Little Loach, what else do you have to say? Ling Feifan chuckled as he hurriedly seized this opportunity to attack. This defensive ability didn't belong to him, so he had no way of retracting it after it had been activated. Moreover, it would only last for 15 minutes. If Yang Xianlong avoided him now, and unleashed his vicious heavenly venerate technique after waiting for his extreme defensive ability to vanish, he would definitely be screwed. Thus, he had to dispose of his opponent as quickly as possible. Peng! 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 He unleashed his fists of fury, relentless and overwhelming as he attempted to submit his opponent. Yang Xianlong was shocked time and time again, and his morale had already fallen into a ditch. Thus, what more power and confidence did he have to defend? After blocking a few strikes, his face was quickly pummeled black and blue. Fortunately, Ling Feifan didn't attempt to unleash any fatal strikes. He simply rendered Yang Xianlong severely wounded and unable to battle. And Taiyun shook them out in a timely manner, and said, "Enough, we'll end it here." Feifan. and Xiao called as she ran over, delight and joy on her face. She hadn't imagined that the issue would be resolved so smoothly. "Heh, I already told you, didn't I? I'll shatter all obstacles and make you my wife," Ling Feifan said, starting to blow his own trumpet again. "You people are cheating," Yang Zhihe said coldly. The golden bell was still pulsating around Ling Feifan, making it as clear as could be. He resolutely lashed out, grabbing at Ling Feifan, and announcing, "Cheaters deserve death." He was going to kill Ling Feifan. That way, his son wouldn't have any other opponent. "Brother Yang, please show some mercy," Antayun said, hurriedly stepping forward to obstruct him. He had also noticed that Ling Feifan's defensive ability was abnormal, with the golden bell capable of being summoned but not unsummoned. Rather than one's own ability, this appeared more like the ability of some treasure. However, he didn't mind this, as Ling Feifan had already displayed his freakish abilities. As a first heaven celestial king, his body had already been tempered by the unique power of the dimension. In other words, he was destined to become a heavenly venerate in the future. If he passed on such a son-in-law, where would he find another one? Thus, he decided to protect Ling Feifan. Peng! The two heavenly venerate exchanged a blow, unleashing a shock wave that instantly reduced the clan residence to ruins. "Brother En, I didn't do that on purpose," Yang Zhihe said upon seeing this, hurriedly retracting his hand. Destroying someone else's residence could be regarded as a small matter or big matter, depending on the owner. Antayun's expression was extremely dark. His clan residence had been destroyed 2 times in 3 days. Just who in the world had he offended? Ling Han stepped forward and said, "You want to kill my grandson? To cheat in a fair battle, and to harbor such impure intentions, what does it matter even if I do kill him?" Yang Zhihe replied proudly. He naturally didn't need to show Ling Han any respect. After all, Ling Han was an opponent, and he more so didn't think that Ling Han was very powerful. "No one can touch my family. Since you want to kill my grandson, I'll send you on your way first." Ling Han replied coldly, a baleful look in his eyes. "A battle in the sky," Yang Zhihe said. With a single stride, he directly flew into the sky. He didn't dare to battle on the ground. Otherwise, if he turned the surroundings into a vast sea, Antayun would very likely truly become wild with rage. Ling Han naturally wasn't afraid of him. With a slight bend of his knees followed by an explosive release, he also shot into the sky, his speed even exceeding Yang Zhihe's. Thus, he caught up to Yang Zhihe before the former could even reach the desired height. Boom! He immediately unleashed a furious punch. Yang Zhihe was both enraged and astonished. This person didn't respect any fucking customs. Was he truly so giddy to attack? However, Ling Han's strike was both quick and vicious, so he had no option but to respond. Peng! He exchanged a blow with Ling Han, the deafening explosions of their clash causing the space around them to shatter into pieces. At the same time, they were both sent flying back. Boom! Heaven and earth responded, with arcs of lightning striking down at Yang Zhihe. However, they completely ignored Ling Han. Yang Zhihe didn't understand this. His opponent had clearly wielded the power of a second-tier heavenly venerate, so why wasn't he being targeted by heaven and earth? Of course, this was even though these strikes were inconsequential to heavenly venerates. He carefully mulled over this, and his expression quickly transformed into one of deep shock. You didn't unleash heavenly venerable tier power. What powers were heavenly venerates most renowned for? This was naturally the 6 fundamental powers of the Genesis world or the unique power of the dimensions. However, he hadn't detected any of these powers in Ling Han's punch just then. "You're a pseudo-heavenly venerate," he exclaimed again. However, his frown grew even deeper. Chapter 2748, 2748 Battling a Second-Tier Heavenly Venerate. Chapter 2748, 2748 Battling a Second-Tier Heavenly Venerate. 2748 Battling a Second-Tier Heavenly Venerate. Ling Han was a pseudo-heavenly venerate. This explained why he hadn't been targeted by heaven and earth. Moreover, pseudo-heavenly venerates naturally couldn't wield the 7 most powerful powers. The problem was, however, that this pseudo-heavenly venerate could rival second-tier heavenly venerates. Had the world been turned upside down? And Taiyun was also stunned. How is this possible? Thinking carefully about his previous exchange with Ling Han, however, he realized that he had been enraged, and thus had failed to make any observations. Mulling over it now, sure enough, he discovered that Ling Han hadn't used any fundamental power of heaven and earth. This person was powerful in his own right, so much so that he could even rival second-tier heavenly venerates. It can't be, right? Ling Feifen also murmured. Fuck. His grandpa was far too powerful, no? A pseudo-heavenly venerate being able to battle against a second-tier heavenly venerate? This was a never-before-seen accomplishment. A mere pseudo-heavenly venerate dares to challenge me? Yang Zhihe bellowed in rage after coming to his senses. Just like the other cultivation tiers, there were also huge gulfs between each minor level in the heavenly venerable tier. Pseudo-heavenly venerates were nothing more than just that, they were far weaker than second-tier heavenly venerates. So what if you're a second-tier heavenly venerate? See how I pummel you. Ling Han said coldly. Today, he would slay a second-tier heavenly venerate for fun. Die. Yang Zhihe roared as he launched a powerful attack. He directly unleashed a heavenly venerate technique, with two balls of white flames appearing in his hands. With a single sweeping motion, he thrust them toward Ling Han. Yang Xianlong had also unleashed the same technique before, but the two balls of flames had only transformed into snakes. Now, however, it was completely different, with the two balls of flames transforming into heaven-scorching flames that spread through the sky. Ling Han humphed as he channeled the indestructible heaven scroll, causing a golden bell to materialize around him, symbols flashing on its surface. He then charged at Yang Zhihe, swinging his fists with fury and ferocity. Peng! 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 Yang Zhihe naturally wouldn't back down, choosing to face Ling Han head-on. Heavenly venerates all tempered their bodies with the 7 fundamental powers. The higher their cultivation, the more of these powers they would be able to draw on. First-tier heavenly venerates could only draw on a single power, while second-tier heavenly venerates could draw on 2. This was as clear as could be. Heavenly venerates naturally all possessed powerful body arts, yet because the regulations were capped at the 9th heaven, such abilities could only be used as supportive ones. Yang Zhihe's body art was no weaker than that of Ling Han. After all, he was a second-tier heavenly venerate who had already tempered his body with one of the 6 fundamental powers. Moreover, he had been at this cultivation level for heaven knew how many epochs. The two of them exchanged blows, with each collision causing the space around them to shatter. Countless celestial bodies fell, affecting the entire martial crystalline dimension. Thus, only a few days passed before several other heavenly venerates hurried over. This was an intense battle between heavenly venerates, so how could they dismiss it? There were second-tier heavenly venerates, first-tier heavenly venerates, and also pseudo-heavenly venerates. Even though this was a low-level dimension, it was already infinitesimally close to being a medium-level dimension. Thus, there was a respectable number of heavenly venerates. When they discovered that Yang Zhihe's opponent was only a pseudo-heavenly venerate, they couldn't help but gawk in surprise, speechless with shock. How could such a ferocious pseudo-heavenly venerate exist in the world? Brother N, do you know of this person's background? A second-tier heavenly venerate asked Taiyun. The grandfather of my daughter's future husband? Taiyun naturally wouldn't say this, so he could only shake his head and reply, I'm not sure, either. This was indeed the truth. Apart from Ling Han's name, he didn't know anything else about him. The elites were all extremely curious. At the same time, they also remained slightly on guard. This was because this pseudo-heavenly venerate certainly wasn't from their realm. In case he was from the Promised City realm, would he perhaps bring change to the already foregone conclusion? Annihilating the Promised City realm and raising the level of our dimension, thereby allowing us to comprehend the fundamental power of the Genesis world, is an opportunity of a lifetime. We can't let anyone ruin our plans, the elites said. Once Yang Zhihe was defeated, they would immediately charge forward to attack. They wouldn't give Ling Han the opportunity to leave alive. Of course, only the second tier and first tier heavenly venerates would have the right to attack. Even so, the first tier heavenly venerates would still have to team up first lest they wanted to be obliterated in a flash. And Tyun pondered for a moment before saying, perhaps this person has come from a higher level dimension. The elites exchanged glances with each other. Even though the neighboring medium-level dimension hadn't invaded them, they had still set up a comprehensive defensive line at the two-realm passageway. Elites constantly guarded this area. Indeed, they should already burn incense to the gods to thank the fact that this higher-level dimension hadn't invaded them. Would they dare to take initiative to launch an attack? Thus, they knew nothing about the neighboring medium-level dimension. Moreover, no one from that dimension had ever traveled over, either, with absolutely no communication between the two dimensions. They coexisted in a peaceful manner, with neither side offending the other. Was this person genuinely an elite from the medium-level dimension? This was possible, because this pseudo-heavenly venerate was far too powerful. It was very likely that only higher-level dimensions could raise such a freak. They all became hesitant. If Ling Han were truly a cultivator from that higher-level dimension, did that signify that their neighboring dimension was finally planning to target them? The higher level a dimension, the more numerous and more powerful their elites would be. This was just like how they could suppress the Promised City realm. Moreover, even if that dimension wasn't much more powerful than them, this still meant that they would need to dispatch a large number of elites to battle against them. At that time, could they still engulf the Promised City realm? They all watched on with heavy hearts. Fortunately, there was still the existence of the dimension itself. This was the most powerful weapon. However, it was also because of this that they were still struggling to defeat the Promised City realm. In the skies, Ling Han and Yang Zhihe continued to do battle. Ling Han was fighting in an extremely conservative manner, and this was because he was still unclear about his own strength. He needed something to compare it against. After battling for a long time, he was finally able to make an accurate assessment of his own strength. His ordinary battle prowess could roughly reach the peak stage of the second tier. After channeling his heavenly venerate techniques, it would naturally increase even further. However, heavenly venerate techniques varied, with each being different in might. Thus, it was difficult to say what level he would reach. In fact, this wasn't his full strength. However, limited by his cultivation level, he didn't dare to unleash his full strength. Otherwise, he might accidentally kill himself before even wounding his opponent. That would be as foolish as could be. Ling Han channeled the 9 Transformations Divine Scroll to elevate his battle prowess. He then channeled the 5 Elements Lightning technique. With his current power, he could easily channel 2 Heavenly Venerate techniques. Yang Zhihe also responded with Heavenly Venerate techniques. However, he had only mastered a single Heavenly Venerate technique, so he used this to launch a flurry of furious attacks at Ling Han. Even so, it was as if he were being ganged up on by 2 equal-level Heavenly Venerates, and this made him feel immense pressure. Heavenly Venerates were all supreme prodigies, however, so even though Yang Zhihe was at a disadvantage, he still remained stubborn and steadfast. In fact, he unleashed brilliant attacks from time to time, threatening to turn the tables on Ling Han. However, it was a shame that Ling Han still possessed a 3rd Heavenly Venerate technique. While channeling the indestructible Heaven's Scroll, he would be invincible. Yang Zhihe was flabbergasted. Did this person's strength have no limit? He could actually channel 3 Heavenly Venerate techniques at once. Even second-tier Heavenly Venerates would be so exhausted that they would quickly collapse, right? What was the strength of Heavenly Venerates? Apart from their bodies being tempered by fundamental power and their body arts being powerful, their other strength was their ability to wield the fundamental power of heaven and earth. It was because of this that Heavenly Venerates could genuinely channel Heavenly Venerate techniques. Even so, there would eventually come a point where they ran out of energy. Ling Han's energy consumption was far too abnormal. As a Heavenly Venerate, Yang Zhihe naturally wouldn't lack strong conviction and willpower. He gritted his teeth and persisted. However, following the continual depletion of his energy, he became less and less confident. If this continued, he would eventually suffer defeat. Chapter 2749 The Surrender of a Heavenly Venerate. Chapter 2749 The Surrender of a Heavenly Venerate. 2749 The Surrender of a Heavenly Venerate. Yang Jihe was extremely powerful. After all, each Heavenly Venerate was a supreme prodigy. This was especially the case since he was someone who had cultivated to the pinnacle in a low-level dimension. Regardless of whether it was talent, knowledge, or willpower, he had reached the apex. Unfortunately, his opponent was Ling Han. He was a freak who had extracted the unique power of heaven knew how many realms. Moreover, he had even fused them together to form a core that endlessly provided him with power. This gave him the right to rival second-tier heavenly venerates while still being a pseudo-heavenly venerate. Moreover, this power was boundless, and it was as if he were a dimension himself. This was the most terrifying aspect. Boom. 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 Yang Jihe was already giving it his all, yet he was still unable to break free from Ling Han's suppression. Everyone watched on in speechlessness. Was a second-tier heavenly venerate about to be defeated? This pseudo-heavenly venerate was definitely going to defy the heavens. Sweet Lord, so this is my grandpa? Ling Feifan gasped. He had heard innumerable stories about Ling Han's strength, yet just hearing about them was far too abstract. Moreover, it was entirely possible that those stories had been exaggerated. By the looks of things now, however, those stories hadn't been exaggerated at all. In fact, they had barely described a tenth of Ling Han's freakish power. How could a person be so freakish? Meanwhile, Yang Xianlong was rendered completely speechless as he glanced at Ling Feifan. He had initially planned to charge forward and capture Ling Feifan once his father achieved victory. He would then brutally humiliate him. Now, however, his dreams had been absolutely crushed. Ling Feifan was indeed weaker than him, yet Ling Han was completely capable of pummeling his father. Thus, if he still dared to act on his impulse, he would truly be asking for a beating. Friends, no matter what, Brother Yang is still someone from our dimension. We can't watch on and allow him to be defeated, can we? A heavenly venerate said. His title was Ancestral River, and he was a second-tier heavenly venerate. Millimeter Chem. Another second-tier heavenly venerate nodded in agreement. The internal conflict among them was another matter. Right now, however, this was something that pertained to another dimension, so they had to cooperate. Brethren, what do you say? The Ancestral River heavenly venerate asked. Counting Yang Jihe as well, they had 4 second-tier heavenly venerates on their side. The other 3 were doing battle on the 2-realm battlefield. And Taiyun shook his head, saying, there's no need to further exacerbate this conflict. After all, it only started off as a small matter. Indeed, this was only a small conflict between 3 youths. Was there any need to involve so many second-tier heavenly venerates? Since Brother An is unwilling to step forward, let the 2 of us resolve this problem instead, the Ancestral River heavenly venerate said. He then strode forward to join the battle. Another heavenly venerate also roared as he soared into the sky. Upon seeing reinforcements, Yang Jihe instantly rediscovered his confidence. At their lofty height, would they still care about the judgment of mere mortals? So what if they ganged up on their opponent? Who dared to disparage them? The 3 heavenly venerates teamed up to attack Ling Han. Ling Han was unfazed. His strength came from his own body, so he was confident in his invincibility. Let's battle it out. He continued to channel the 3 heavenly venerate techniques, with the core in his body funneling power into him and allowing him to continue the high-intensity battle. However, the 3 heavenly venerates were no pushovers, either, and they were completely able to rival Ling Han after teaming up. The battle continued for a month, yet it was still impossible to decide a victor. Friends, hear me out, would you? Why don't you all stop for a moment? And Taiyun said. The Ancestral River heavenly venerate and the others all nodded in their minds. Ling Han's strength was seemingly infinite, and they couldn't see any hope of suppressing or defeating him. Thus, they were better off ending the battle now. However, Ling Han was unwilling to accept this. After all, Yang Jihe had wanted to kill his grandson. Ignoring the ancestral river Heavenly Venerate and the four knights Heavenly Venerate, Ling Han continued to furiously attack Yang Jihe. You! The ancestral river Heavenly Venerate and the four knights Heavenly Venerate were both infuriated. They had already stopped, yet Ling Han was still shamelessly continuing. They had no option but to rejoin the battle. 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. The battle between the four Heavenly Venerates was intense and chaotic. However, the ancestral river Heavenly Venerate and the others couldn't compare to Ling Han, who had a power core in his body that endlessly provided him with strength. They were indeed powerful, yet there would eventually come a point where their energy was exhausted. However, there were 3 of them, so it was entirely possible for 2 of them to battle against Ling Han while the third stood aside to rest. In fact, they only needed a short moment. Heavenly Venerates could forcefully extract the power of heaven and earth simply by opening their mouths and breathing. In just a few breaths, they could recover to their peak state. This was also the reason why Ling Han had been able to battle against Wu Haoyang for hundreds of thousands of years. Their recovery ability was far too quick. If this continued, they might never determine a victor. As the battle dragged on, the ancestral river Heavenly Venerate and the others became increasingly anxious. Right now, they were invading the Promised City realm, so elites like them couldn't leave the front lines for an extended period of time. Yet, 3 second-tier Heavenly Venerates had been caught up here, so the situation on the front lines was becoming increasingly dangerous. The Promised City realm was indeed weaker than the martial crystalline realm, but not by very much. Friend, what condition do you have to stop? The ancestral river Heavenly Venerate asked, finally yielding to his opponent. In his eyes, nothing was more important than defeating the Promised City realm. Give me Yang Jihe's head, Ling Han said. Impossible. To say nothing to Yang Jihe, even the ancestral river Heavenly Venerate and the others couldn't agree to this. Second-tier Heavenly Venerates were the most powerful beings of the martial crystalline realm, so they definitely couldn't sacrifice one of them. Then the only option is to battle, Ling Han said coldly. You're taking things too far, the 3 Heavenly Venerates roared in fury. They all retrieved their Heavenly Venerate tools. Wang, wang, wang. 3 columns of brilliant light soared into the sky. These 3 Heavenly Venerate tools consisted of a sword, a broadsword, and a spear. With these Heavenly Venerate tools in hand, the battle prowess of the 3 Heavenly Venerates instantly soared. Ling Han didn't hold back, either, retrieving his divine demon sword, whose might astonished the 9 heavens. The 4 of them continued to do battle, with the 3 Heavenly Venerates already gaining an advantage. However, it was still impossible for them to suppress Ling Han. After battling for another 10 years, even Antayun couldn't watch on any longer. He flew into the sky, and said, Ling Han, that's enough. Otherwise, I'll have to step in as well. They all shared a common goal, and that was to defeat the Promised City realm. When that dimension collapsed, they would then share the huge opportunity that presented itself. Ling Han also knew that he couldn't possibly kill Yang Jihe with so many Heavenly Venerates opposing him. In fact, his failure was guaranteed as soon as Yang Jihe decided to flee. It wasn't that easy to kill a second-tier Heavenly Venerate. He pondered for a moment before replying, Fine, then tell Yang Jihe to apologize to my grandson. I'll temporarily forgive him after that. Gasp. Telling a paramount Heavenly Venerate to apologize to a mere celestial king? And only forgiving the former temporarily? Yang Jihe almost went wild with rage. So what if he decided to slaughter 10,000 ninth heaven celestial kings? Who dared to reprimand him? Now, he had only attempted to kill a single celestial king, and he had more so failed at that, yet Ling Han actually wanted him to apologize. Ling Han spread his hands, and said, Don't want to. Then let's keep fighting. I don't mind at all. Brother Yang. The ancestral river Heavenly Venerate and the others looked toward Yang Jihe, and said, Please understand the priorities. Since Ling Han had already taken a step back, it was now Yang Jihe's turn to concede. After all, they each needed to make a concession to resolve this problem, no? The 4 knights Heavenly Venerate and Antayun looked at him as well, and it was as if their expressions were saying, If you don't agree, then we'll step in and help you agree. Yang Jihe naturally couldn't die. However, he also couldn't act on his own whim. No matter what, defeating the Promised City realm was still the most important task at hand. Fine. Yang Jihe said, the veins on his forehead bulging. He had no option but to bow his head unless he wanted to have a falling out with the other heavenly venerates. Chapter 2750, 2750 Ceasefire. Chapter 2750, 2750 Ceasefire. 2750 Ceasefire. Yang Jihe descended to the ground, stopping before Ling Feifen, and saying, I shouldn't have developed killing intent against you. Ling Feifen picked his ears, and said, come again. That's an apology. I don't accept it. He waved his hand with a righteous expression. Ling Han had the upper hand now, so Ling Feifen naturally needed to take advantage of it. What a joke. Just because he was weaker, he deserved to be flattened and stomped on. He was also a person. And Xiao's eyes instantly glimmered with intoxication. This was the pride and domineering aura of her lover that she adored. Keep posturing, why don't you? Everyone said in their minds. At the same time, they were also incredibly envious of Ling Feifen. To have a second-tier heavenly venerate bow his head and apologize, even just as a formality, was still something that he could brag about forever. Ling Han stood beside Ling Feifen with a smile, and said, I also don't feel like that was an apology. What? You think our Ling clan is easy to pick on? A cold glint appeared in his eyes. He was still a pseudo-heavenly venerate, so when he became a true heavenly venerate, killing second-tier heavenly venerates would be as easy as a wave of his hand. Yang Jihe's heart jolted. He could indeed belittle Ling Han right now. However, the latter was only a pseudo-heavenly venerate at this moment. What would happen when he advanced? Even if all 7 of the second-tier heavenly venerates here teamed up, would they be powerful enough to stop Ling Han? There were only 2 ways to deal with such a freak: kill him before he became invincible, or genuinely bow one's head and resolve any animosity. With this in mind, he eventually heaved a sigh. I was indeed in the wrong. I shouldn't have developed killing intent toward this young friend. Please accept my apology. As he said this, he retrieved a spatial god tool and handed it to Ling Feifen, saying, treat this as compensation. Hopefully, it can soothe your anger. Not only was he apologizing, but he was even giving compensation. As a second-tier heavenly venerate, he was genuinely lowering his status as much as he could. Ling Feifen looked toward Ling Han. Upon seeing him nod, he accepted the spatial god tool with a smile, and said, Senior, you're truly being too generous. If you ever need me in the future, just give me a yell. Of course, that's as long as you compensate me each time. He used his divine sense to observe the spatial god tool, finding that it was indeed filled with an astonishing amount of treasures. Yang Jihe was truly pissed off at this moment, as this was the betrothal gift that he had prepared for the clan. Thus, even with his wealth, he couldn't scrape together many such gifts. How many more times did Ling Feifen want to receive compensation? Friend Ling, and other friends, come on over and take a seat, and Taiyun said in invitation. After so many years, the reconstruction of the clan residence was naturally complete. Ling Han and the 4 second-tier heavenly venerates all entered the clan. Some of the first-tier heavenly venerates also walked over, wanting to listen to the conversation. After all, if the 5 super elites discussed cultivation, they might have the opportunity to comprehend something new. Friend Ling, where are you from? The 4 knights heavenly venerate couldn't help but ask this after taking a seat in the guest hall. Just what sort of place had raised such a freak? The celestial realm, Ling Han replied with a smile. He didn't conceal the truth. Celestial realm? The heavenly venerates were all at a loss. They had never heard of this place before. Ling Han offered an explanation, telling them that the celestial realm was the youngest and most recently born dimension of the Genesis world. At the very least, this would be true until a 2-realm passageway formed between the celestial realm and the dimension after it. Super low-level dimension, the heavenly venerates exclaimed in shock. Such a realm could produce a freak such as Ling Han? Was that truly a super low-level dimension? Ling Han recounted his experience of going to the transcendent dimension, and he described to them the atmosphere of that vast heaven and earth. At the same time, he also hung a grave threat over their heads. After hearing about the existence of hysteria, the heavenly venerates all wore grave expressions. They were racking their brains for ways to annihilate the Promised City realm so that they could use this opportunity to raise their cultivation. By the looks of things now, however, it was as if they were fighting with someone else on the edge of a volcanic crater. Regardless of who won, as long as the volcano erupted, they would both be disintegrated into dust. I urge you to end this pointless battle and head to the Flaming Frost realm to fight against Hysteria's invasion. Otherwise, once Hysteria makes its way in, the entire world will be finished, Ling Han said. Moreover, the Flaming Frost realm is a transcendent dimension, making it possible to reach the 7th tier. This is the destination that we should all strive toward. Everyone hesitated after hearing this. Conquering the Promised City realm had been their dream for generation after generation. Countless prodigies with unlimited potential had died for this cause, as had countless supreme elites. Now, however, they were being urged to end the battle just like that. And amicably join hands to face Hysteria. How could they accept this? Ling Han chuckled, and continued, if I hadn't come across this, then that would have been it. However, since I've become aware of the internal battle going on here, it's my responsibility to step in. Only 2 options sit before you. End the battle, or I'll join the Promised City realm. With my support, do you think you can still defeat the Promised City realm? Gasp. Everyone gasped upon hearing this, and they couldn't help but feel like Ling Han was being extremely unscrupulous. He was actually using this to threaten them. However, this was also extremely effective. Just then, even a team of 3 second-tier heavenly venerates had failed to suppress Ling Han. As such, him joining the Promised City realm might not necessarily turn the tables for them, but it would at least mitigate their disadvantage. The ancestral river heavenly venerate couldn't help but ask, Friend Ling, this battle doesn't involve you, so why insist on becoming a foe? Ling Han shook his head, saying, you guys haven't been to the realm battlefield, so you don't understand the brutality of that place. Right now, the most critically important task is to resist Hysteria's invasion. Otherwise, how can a destroyed nest protect its eggs? What does it matter even if you become 3rd tier or 4th tier heavenly venerates? You'll still suffer the fate of being crushed into scraps. Everyone fell silent. However, no one questioned the veracity of Ling Han's words by thinking that he had made Hysteria up to frighten them. That would be far beneath him. Allow us a moment to consider this, the heavenly venerates said. This matter was far too important, so none of them could make up their minds on a whim. The others all took their leave, while Ling Han remained with Antaiun to discuss the wedding between Ling Feifen and Anshua. The 2 youths were already in love anyway, and now their backgrounds were more so well-matched in status. Thus, their marriage was naturally agreed upon very quickly. They weren't in a hurry to get married, as Ling Han needed to first go to the Promised City realm to bring Ling Zhenxue and his wife over. Moreover, he still needed to end the war between the 2 dimensions. Ling Han set off with Ling Feifen, heading toward the 2-realm passageway. His speed was now astonishing, so it only took him a few days to reach his destination. This place was very similar to the Celestial Realm, with an army encampment keeping guard and a large number of cultivators present to train themselves. Ling Feifen had traveled through many dimensions with his parents, so he had long since become accustomed to acclimatizing himself to the regulations of each world. Meanwhile, Ling Han more so didn't need to worry about this. He had created a power core for himself, so things would be the same for him no matter where he went. His strength came from within. Thus, when they arrived at the 2-realm passageway, their battle prowess wasn't affected in the least. They entered the passageway without any difficulties, and it would be impossible for others to notice anything amiss about them. Thus, they naturally weren't stopped by anyone as they started to travel between the dimensions. After some effort, they passed the most chaotic area of the 2-realm passageway, and arrived at the Promised City realm. Here, they also didn't attract the attention of anyone. It was as if they were native to this world. Ling Feifen led the way, bringing Ling Han to the army encampment to look for Ling Zhenxue and his wife. Ling Feifen. The people in the encampment exclaimed in deep shock upon seeing Ling Feifen. After all, many of them had seen him being defeated and captured. How had he suddenly returned? You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.